Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the North Atlantic in the year 1694, where the sea is wider than imagination. Warmer dreams disappear within days, and every horizon promises either fortune or a slow death. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow historical journeys. Now dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle ocean breeze, and let's drift together into tonight's story. The first thing you notice isn't the smell of salt. It's the tar. Long before your boots touch the deck of the merchant brig Providence, thick black tar clings to the ropes, the rails, the masts, and eventually your hands. Every sailor aboard carries its scent on his clothes like an invisible uniform. It mixes with damp timber, stale beer, wet wool, fish oil, and dozens of men who have not enjoyed a proper bath in months. You had imagined adventure. Everyone in your village did. Old sailors sitting outside taverns spoke about endless oceans sparkling beneath golden sunsets. Merchants returned wearing colorful foreign fabrics. Children gathered around them to hear stories of tropical islands and strange birds with feathers brighter than flowers. No one spoke very much about swollen gums from scurvy, frozen fingers, broken ribs, or the quiet funerals performed over dark water. Those details rarely survived the journey home. Your name is William Carter. You are 19 years old. Until last week, you had never seen the Atlantic Ocean. You grew up nearly 50 miles inland, helping your father repair fences and harvest barley. The loudest sound in your childhood was church bells drifting over rolling fields. Every season followed another with comforting certainty. Spring planting, summer labor, autumn harvest, winter waiting. Then your father died during a harsh fever. Death arrived almost immediately. Landowners are patient with weather. They are rarely patient with unpaid rent. Your mother tried selling wool. Your younger sisters gathered herbs to earn a few extra pennies. It wasn't enough. The recruiting agent who visited your village seemed almost heaven-sent. He wore polished boots and carried silver coins heavy enough to catch everyone's attention. 3 years at sea, he promised. Food every day. Good wages. And perhaps enough money to buy your own land. He forgot to mention that surviving those 3 years would be the hardest part. Now you stand on the crowded dock at Bristol, staring upward at the towering masts of the Providence. The vessel looks enormous from below, though experienced captains would call her merely average. Around you, barrels are rolled aboard one after another. Salted beef, dried peas, hard biscuits packed into wooden casks. Coils of rope thicker than your arm disappear below deck. Live chickens protest loudly from woven baskets, while 2 frightened pigs refuse to cooperate with anyone. Above everything echoes the sharp voice of Captain Elias Thornton. He wastes very few words. Every order arrives like a cannon shot. Move that barrel. Lift together. Secure the mainsail. No delays. You quickly learn something every Atlantic sailor discovers. Ships never wait for nervous men. Before noon, someone hands you a coarse wool blanket. Another sailor laughs. Guard it with your life. You assume he's joking. Months later, you'll realize he was perfectly serious. Below deck, the sleeping quarters resemble nothing you imagined. There are no individual cabins for ordinary sailors, no comfortable beds, no privacy whatsoever. Instead, rows of hammocks hang only inches apart. When everyone lies down at once, shoulders nearly touch. The air feels thick enough to drink. Lantern light barely reaches the far corners, leaving shadows where rats confidently conduct their nightly business. You hear scratching immediately. One sailor notices your expression. They'll eat before you do if you leave food lying around. He isn't exaggerating. A gray rat nearly the size of a rabbit darts across a beam before disappearing into darkness. You suddenly miss your farmhouse. A bell rings above. Departure. Dozens of dock workers untie heavy mooring ropes while sailors scramble across the rigging like spiders climbing an enormous web. The harbor slowly begins slipping away. Families wave from shore. Some wives cry openly. Children run along the docks until they can no longer keep pace. You search desperately for your own mother among hundreds of faces. You cannot find her. Perhaps that's kinder. Goodbyes become harder when both people refuse to let go. The wind catches the great canvas sails. Wood groans. Rigging tightens. The Providence leans gently before gliding toward the open sea. By sunset, England already looks smaller. By morning, it disappears entirely. That is the moment many new sailors finally understand something impossible to appreciate on land. Home is no longer a place. Tis a memory. Your first full day begins long before sunrise. Someone kicks your boot. Watch begins. You have no idea what watch means. Within minutes, you're hauling wet rope through freezing hands while the stars still cover the sky. Time aboard ship is divided into watches rather than ordinary days. 4 hours working, 4 hours resting, then work again. Storm, calm, daylight, darkness. The routine never truly ends. Your palms blister before breakfast. Breakfast itself offers little comfort. One hard biscuit, a small portion of salted beef, weak beer. Fresh water exists but must be rationed carefully. Beer often remains safer than stagnant water after several weeks at sea. The biscuit nearly breaks one of your teeth. Another sailor smiles. You check for worms. You laugh. He doesn't. Looking closer, you discover tiny white larvae moving inside the bread. The older sailors simply knock the biscuit against the table. Several insects fall out. Then they eat anyway. A protein, they joke. No one wastes food. No one can afford such luxury. The Atlantic possesses a remarkable talent. It strips away unnecessary pride with astonishing speed. Within 3 days, your expensive village boots are permanently soaked. Within 4, your back aches constantly. Within 5, every muscle protests climbing the shrouds. Then comes seasickness. No heroic story truly prepares anyone for it. The ocean doesn't merely rock the ship. It rearranges your entire body. Your stomach refuses every meal. Your head pounds endlessly. Even breathing feels exhausting. You lean over the rail until nothing remains inside you. Then you continue retching anyway. An older Irish sailor named Patrick watches without sympathy. The sea collects her tax. He offers no medicine, only experience. Keep working. Oddly enough, he's correct. Standing still makes everything worse. Movement eventually teaches your body how to survive the endless motion. Not everyone succeeds. One young cabin boy spends nearly a week unable to eat properly. His face becomes frighteningly pale. Eventually, even he adjusts. The Atlantic allows adaptation. Never comfort. One evening, the wind disappears altogether. The sails hang uselessly. The sea transforms into polished glass, stretching endlessly in every direction. The silence replaces creaking ropes. Even the gulls vanish. You expect everyone to celebrate the peaceful weather. Instead, anxiety quietly spreads across the crew. Without wind, the ship cannot move. Without movement, supplies continue disappearing while destination remains unchanged. Captain Thornton studies the empty horizon longer than usual. Nobody interrupts him. Calm seas can become more frightening than rough ones. During idle hours, you finally meet more of your shipmates. Patrick once served aboard Royal Navy warships before losing 2 fingers during battle. Samuel escaped London's crowded streets after surviving the Great Fire as a child. Hans comes from Hamburg and speaks surprisingly good English despite constant teasing over his accent. Old Miguel claims to have crossed the Atlantic 27 times. No one knows whether that's true. No one argues either. At sea, experience often matters more than perfect honesty. Stories become another form of currency. That night, Miguel shares one quietly while everyone repairs torn canvas beneath lantern light. He tells of a ship that vanished somewhere west of Ireland. Not sunk, not burned, simply found drifting months later. Sails intact, cargo untouched, no living soul aboard. Someone asks what happened. Miguel shrugs. The ocean doesn't explain herself. Nobody laughs. Because everyone aboard already suspects the same uncomfortable truth. The Atlantic keeps more secrets than any king. Near midnight, clouds gather unexpectedly. The temperature drops. Patrick glances upward once. A storm. You see nothing particularly alarming. He has watched oceans for 30 years. You have watched them for 6 days. You decide to trust his judgment. Within an hour, the first distant thunder rolls across the darkness. The peaceful sea begins breathing again. Slowly at first, then harder. Captain Thornton steps onto the quarterdeck without raising his voice. Every sailor instantly moves. Lanterns swing violently. Canvas snaps overhead. The ship starts climbing waves that did not exist an hour earlier. You tighten your grip on a soaked rope as cold rain suddenly crashes across the deck like handfuls of thrown stones. Somewhere high above, a sail tears with a sound disturbingly similar to fabric ripping inside a cathedral. The captain shouts a single order that disappears into the rising wind. Then lightning briefly illuminates the Atlantic, revealing walls of black water advancing straight toward the Providence. The lightning ripped across the heavens so brilliantly that for a heartbeat the Atlantic seemed frozen in Sid. A giant sheet of white glass. Every mast, every rope, every terrified face stood out with impossible clarity before darkness swallowed everything again. The thunder that followed did not merely echo overhead, it rolled through the timbers beneath your feet, vibrating inside your chest until it felt as though the ship itself had grown frightened. Captain Thornton's voice somehow rose above the storm. "Reef the topsails." The command reached experienced hands immediately. Patrick, Hans, and 3 others scrambled upward into the rigging without hesitation. You stared after them in disbelief. The mast was already swaying wildly, swinging from side to side like a tree caught in a hurricane. Climbing it in daylight would have demanded courage. Climbing it in darkness, with rain blinding your eyes and wind trying to tear you loose, looked almost impossible. A rough hand struck your shoulder. "Move." It was the bosun. He shoved a dripping coil of rope into your arms before pointing toward the mainmast. "You'll haul when they call." You nodded, though you barely understood what he meant. Within seconds, the sailors above became little more than black silhouettes against flashes of lightning. They crawled along narrow wooden yards hundreds of feet above the rolling deck, balancing on ropes no wider than a man's wrist. Below them, the Atlantic roared like thousands of angry animals. You heard Patrick shout, "Haul!" Every man on deck threw his weight backward. The rope burned against your palms even through soaked wool gloves. Rain made everything slippery. Water streamed across the deck so quickly it looked like a river flowing downhill. Again came the shout. Again everyone hauled. The giant sail slowly folded against the yard. Not gracefully, not neatly. It fought every inch. Wind transformed ordinary canvas into something alive. One mistake, one missed knot, one loose grip, and a sailor could vanish into the darkness before anyone even learned his name. The storm intensified. Rain no longer fell straight downward, it struck from every direction, driven sideways by furious gusts that stole your breath. Waves climbed higher until each one seemed determined to swallow the Providence whole. The bow disappeared beneath green water. For one horrifying moment, you believed the ship had begun sinking. Instead, she rose again, groaning as though every plank objected to being forced back toward the surface. Miguel appeared beside you carrying an axe. You stared. Why would anyone need an axe during a storm? He noticed your confusion. If the mast breaks, he shouted, we cut it free. You looked upward. The mast. Cut it down. It'll drag us under if it falls alongside. Only then did you understand how fragile survival really was. The towering masts that carried the ship across the Atlantic could become deadly anchors within seconds. Another enormous wave crashed over the bow. This time the water did not leave immediately. It swept across the deck with astonishing force. Your boots lost their grip. Suddenly you were sliding. Hands clawed helplessly across wet planks while barrels, buckets, and loose coils of rope rushed past together in the flood. You reached desperately for anything solid. Nothing. The ship rolled farther. The sea continued, pulling you toward the rail. Somewhere nearby, another sailor screamed. A heavy boot landed on your coat. Patrick. He dropped flat against the deck, wrapped one arm around a belaying pin, and seized your wrist with the other. Hold it. The water finally drained through the scuppers. Your body slammed against the planks hard enough to leave bruises that would remain for weeks. Patrick pulled you upright. You've learned the first lesson. What lesson? The ocean always pulls harder than you think. There was no time for further conversation. Another order came. More ropes. More sails. More climbing. The hours blended together until you could no longer distinguish midnight from dawn. Everything became cold. Everything became wet. Everything became exhausting. No one complained. There simply wasn't enough energy left for complaints. Near sunrise, the storm reached its greatest violence. The wind shrieked through the rigging with such force that ordinary conversation became impossible. Commands were passed by gestures as often as voices. Captain Thornton never stopped moving. He crossed the quarterdeck repeatedly, studying every sail, every wave, every spar. His calmness surprised you. Later, you would discover that experienced captains rarely appeared frightened in front of their crews. Even when they were. Especially then. The Providence suddenly lurched so violently that one of the ship's boats tore loose from its lashings. It smashed against the rail before disappearing into the sea. Nobody attempted to save it. Doing so would have cost several lives. Out here, difficult choices became ordinary. A cracked bow. RL. A broken sail. A lost boat. Everything could be replaced. A sailor could not. Just after daylight, another cry erupted from the foremast. You looked upward. One of the younger seamen had slipped while tying down a reefed sail. For an instant, he hung suspended by one arm. Below him stretched 40 feet of empty air before the hard deck. Every man watching froze. His fingers lost their grip. He fell. The impact echoed sickeningly through the ship. Silence followed. The boatswain reached him first. The sailor was breathing. Barely. One leg bent at an angle no leg should ever bend. Blood trickled from beneath tangled hair. The ship's surgeon arrived carrying a leather case worn smooth by years of salt and rain. You expected clean bandages, perhaps polished instruments. Instead, you saw stained linen, wooden splints, crude needles, and bottles filled with liquids of uncertain origin. The surgeon examined the injured sailor quickly. There'll be pain. The unconscious man never heard him. Two sailors held the broken leg. The surgeon pulled. The snap of bone returning into place turned several stomachs, including yours. No sleeping potion. No anesthetic. Only a strip of leather placed between the patient's teeth once he regained consciousness. The injured sailor screamed until his voice broke. Then the storm swallowed even that sound. You had never considered how dangerous ordinary work could become at sea. Nobody had attacked him. No cannon had fired. No pirate had boarded. A wet rope and one misplaced step had nearly ended his life. By afternoon, the wind finally began weakening. Not disappearing, simply becoming survivable. A cloud still raced overhead, but patches of pale sunlight slowly emerged between them. The Atlantic remained enormous, restless, and deeply intimidating, yet no longer looked determined to destroy everyone aboard. The crew moved more slowly now. Fatigue settled into every movement. Eyes appeared red from sleeplessness. Hands trembled while coiling ropes. Even Captain Thornton leaned briefly against the rail when he believed nobody was watching. The storm had lasted less than a day. It felt like a month. Only then did you notice the damage. One topsail hung in ribbons. Several yards had cracked. The missing boat left an empty space along the deck. 3 chickens had vanished. Nobody knew whether they had drowned or simply flown into the darkness. A hatch cover had splintered. Several barrels of fresh water had broken loose, smashing themselves against the bulkhead before their precious contents poured into the sea. That loss troubled everyone more than the missing livestock. Fresh water meant life. Without it, every remaining day of the voyage became more difficult. The carpenter immediately began repairs. You watched him work with quiet fascination. Unlike the blacksmiths back home, he carried an assortment of chisels, augers, wooden pegs, and adzes designed specifically for ships. He inspected each damaged beam by tapping it with a small mallet. Listening, not looking. The different sounds told him whether hidden cracks lurked inside the timber. Years of experience had trained his ears better than most men's eyes. "Wood speaks," he said after noticing your curiosity. "You just have to know the language." By evening, cooking resumed. Smoke drifted carefully from the galley stove despite the lingering swell. Dinner consisted of pea porridge thick enough to stand a spoon upright. Salted pork accompanied it. The meat had spent months inside brine before ever reaching the ship. Its flavor belonged somewhere between ham and seawater. Still, every sailor ate gratefully. Hard labor transformed even poor meals into welcome rewards. You sat beside Hans while drying your jacket near the galley. He removed one boot. Water poured from it. "I've crossed this ocean 6 times," he said with a tired grin. "And every crossing teaches me something new." "What did this one teach you?" He thought for a moment. "Never trust a quiet afternoon." You laughed. It felt strange after the previous night. Several others laughed as well. Not because the joke was especially clever. Because surviving together created its own kind of friendship. Fear shared among strangers often became stronger than years of ordinary acquaintance. Later that night, Miguel produced a tiny wooden flute from inside his sea chest. Its surface had been polished by decades of use. Without saying a word, he began playing a slow melody unlike anything you had heard in your village. The tune drifted gently through the cramped berth deck. Conversation faded. Even the rats seemed quieter. No one applauded when he finished. Applause belonged in theaters. Here silence carried greater respect. Patrick finally spoke. "My wife liked that one." Miguel nodded. "Mine too." Neither man said another word. You suddenly realized something that had escaped why. Our notice since leaving Bristol. Very few sailors talked about going home. They spoke about wives, children, fields, dogs, old taverns, favorite fishing spots, but rarely about the journey's end. Perhaps speaking too confidently tempted fate. Or perhaps after enough voyages, a sailor learned that home was never guaranteed. As the lantern beside your hammock dimmed, the ship continued its slow rise and fall upon the endless Atlantic. The storm had passed, but it had taken something from every man aboard. Strength, sleep, confidence. For the first time since leaving England, you understood that surviving this voyage would require far more than strong arms. It would demand endurance of a kind no recruiting agent had ever mentioned. And somewhere beyond the dark horizon, still many hundreds of miles away, dangers far greater than wind and rain were already waiting. Morning arrived without ceremony. No glowing sunrise greeted the crew. No peaceful chorus of seabirds welcomed another day. Instead, the Atlantic presented itself beneath a blanket of gray cloud. The horizon blurred until sea and sky appeared stitched together by the same dull color. The storm had moved eastward during the night, but it left behind a restless swell that lifted the asterisk Providence in long, slow motions, as though the ocean were breathing in its sleep. The bell rang before dawn. You climbed from your hammock with every muscle protesting. Your shoulders felt bruised from hauling rope. Your hands had become a collection of fresh cuts covered with salt that stung whenever you flexed your fingers. Even your knees ached from repeatedly slamming into the deck during yesterday's chaos. No one asked how you felt. No one needed to. Every face aboard carried the same exhaustion. Breakfast offered little improvement over the weather. Another hard biscuit. Another strip of salted beef. A wooden mug filled with weak beer. You cracked the biscuit against the edge of the table. Several black insects tumbled onto the planks. You no longer stared in disgust. You brushed them away and ate. Patrick noticed. "You'll make a sailor yet." It sounded almost like praise. The calm after a storm never meant rest. It meant repair. A canvas had to be stitched before another squall arrived. Rigging required tightening. Damaged blocks needed replacing. Every loose peg, cracked spar, or frayed rope represented another opportunity for disaster. The bosun assigned you to the sailmaker. Until now, you had assumed sails were replaced whenever they tore. The sailmaker laughed at the idea. No captain carries enough spare canvas for that. He spread a damaged section across the deck. Only then did you appreciate its size. The heavy linen was thicker than a winter blanket and stiff with salt. Several long tears ran through it where yesterday's wind had ripped the fabric apart. The sailmaker threaded an enormous needle with waxed twine. Watch carefully. His stitches were not neat. They were strong. Every movement served a purpose. Each knot had been perfected through decades of practice. When he finally handed you the needle, your own attempts looked clumsy beside his. You'll improve. I hope so. You must. He smiled without humor. The Atlantic grades harshly. By midday, the clouds finally opened enough to reveal sunlight. Steam rose from wet planks. Sailors hung blankets across lines stretched between the masts. For the first time since departure, laughter returned in earnest. Someone discovered a barrel of apples that had survived the storm untouched. The fruit was already beginning to soften, so Captain Thornton ordered it distributed before it spoiled. Each sailor received one apple. Just one. You held yours almost reverently. Fresh fruit had become an unexpected treasure after barely 2 weeks at sea. The crisp sweetness exploded across your tongue. For a brief moment, you were back in your father's orchard during autumn harvest, climbing branches while your sisters argued below about which apples belonged to whom. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. The Atlantic rarely allowed homesickness to linger. Work interrupted everything. Around noon, a cry came from the bow. Sail. Instantly, every conversation ceased. Captain Thornton climbed toward the quarterdeck telescope. The crew watched him instead of the distant horizon. His reaction mattered more than what anyone else could see. After several silent moments, he lowered the brass telescope. Merchantmen. A collective breath escaped the crew. Not a warship. Not pirates. Just another vessel sharing the enormous emptiness. As the afternoon progressed, the stranger slowly emerged from the haze. She sailed under Dutch colors. Her hull rode low in the water, suggesting a heavy cargo. The two ships never approached closely. Out here, caution outweighed curiosity. Still, both crews gathered along their rails. Hats were raw. He said. A few shouted greetings vanished into the wind. One sailor aboard the Dutch ship played a short tune on a whistle. Someone aboard the Providence answered with a wave of his cap. Within an hour, both vessels continued towards separate horizons. The encounter lasted only minutes, yet it reminded everyone of something important. They were not alone upon the Atlantic. Hundreds of ships crossed these waters every year. Some reached their destinations. Others simply disappeared. No charts marked where they rested. That evening, Miguel sat beside you while sharpening a marlin spike. You know why sailors greet strangers. You shrugged. Because tomorrow one of us may need rescuing. He paused. And tomorrow one of us may become the rescue. Those words stayed with you. The sea cared nothing for nationality. English, Dutch, French, Spanish. Storms treated every flag equally. Later, while scrubbing the deck with sandstone blocks, you noticed something peculiar. The sailors scrubbed constantly, every day, sometimes twice, not because the ship needed to look impressive, because blood, grease, fish scales, spilled food, and salt quickly turned wooden planks dangerously slippery. A clean deck saved lives. The work was brutal. Bent over for hours, pushing heavy stones back and forth while seawater washed across your boots, you felt your spine screaming in protest. Patrick chuckled. I thought sailing meant standing at the wheel. I thought there'd be more sailing. There is. He pointed toward the brushes in your hands. This is sailing. The romantic image you once carried had completely vanished. A sailor was carpenter, laborer, cleaner, rigger, porter, mechanic, climber, and sometimes soldier. Steering the ship occupied surprisingly little time. As sunset approached, another lesson arrived. Laundry. You had not considered how dozens of men washed clothes in the middle of the Atlantic. The answer proved surprisingly simple. A rope was tied securely around your waist. Another sailor held the opposite end. You leaned over the side, dipped shirts into seawater, rubbed them against rough wooden boards with coarse soap, then hauled them back aboard. One careless movement could send both laundry and sailor into the ocean. Fresh water remained far too valuable for washing. Salt left the clothes stiff after drying. Still, clean clothing reduced lice and skin infections. Out here, cleanliness was less about comfort than survival. The ship's surgeon often reminded everyone that small cuts became dangerous when ignored. Salt helped in some ways. It harmed in others. That night you noticed one sailor limping badly. His name was Edward. He had kept quiet since the storm. Now his boot left tiny drops of blood across the deck. The surgeon ordered him to remove it. The smell escaped immediately. Several sailors turned away. A nail had pierced Edward's foot days earlier. Instead of reporting the injury, he had continued working. The wound had swollen horribly. Red streaks climbed toward his ankle. In an age before antibiotics, even minor injuries inspired fear. The surgeon cleaned the wound with strong spirits. Edward gritted his teeth until tears filled his eyes. "You fool," Patrick muttered afterward. Edward stared at the deck. "I didn't want to seem weak." Patrick sighed. The sea doesn't reward pride. Over the following days, everyone watched Edward carefully. A simple puncture could claim a life just as easily as a cannonball. Disease required no dramatic entrance. It worked quietly, patiently, often successfully. Several evenings later, the weather remained unusually fair. Captain Thornton took advantage of the calm by allowing the crew an extra hour before night watch. Such generosity was uncommon. Miguel produced his flute again. Hans sang a German folk song no Englishman understood. Patrick answered with an Irish ballad about fishermen lost off County Cork. Soon others joined in. The melodies blended awkwardly, yet somehow beautifully. Different languages, Different childhoods, different countries, one floating world. You realized something remarkable. Most of these men would never have met anywhere except at sea. On land, they belonged to different kingdoms. Out here, they belonged to the same ship. As darkness settled, Captain Thornton unexpectedly addressed the crew. He was not known for speeches. Good work after the storm. That alone surprised everyone. We've lost water. He gestured toward the damaged barrels. We'll reduce each man's daily ration. A murmur passed through the sailors. No one argued. There was nothing to argue about. The supplies obeyed mathematics, not wishes. Every sailor's water allowance became slightly smaller beginning the next morning. At first, the reduction seemed insignificant. Only a few mouthfuls. Yet as days stretched into weeks, those missing mouthfuls would grow increasingly important. You lay awake longer than usual that night. The berth deck smelled of damp wool, smoke, sweat, and tar. Somewhere nearby, Edward groaned in his sleep. Above, the timbers creaked rhythmically. The Atlantic slapped gently against the hull. You thought about home again. Not with longing this time. With distance. Already memories felt strangely softened. The exact sound of your mother's voice. The shape of your father's hands. The smell of fresh-cut barley. You feared forgetting. Perhaps that frightened you more than the ocean itself. Weeks at sea had begun changing you in ways invisible to the eye. Your hands were harder. Your posture different. Your instincts sharper. When the ship rolled unexpectedly, your feet adjusted automatically. You no longer reached for support every few moments. The Atlantic was teaching your body before your mind realized the lessons. Just before sleep claimed you, a faint ringing drifted across the water. At first you assumed it came from the ship's own bell. But it continued, slow, steady, far away. Patrick opened one eye. You hear that? You nodded. What is it? He remained silent for several seconds. Finally he answered. Either another ship. He glanced toward the darkness beyond the hull. Or someone who desperately wants us to believe there is one. Nobody spoke after Patrick's remark. The faint ringing drifted across the Atlantic once more before fading into the endless darkness. Every sailor on deck paused long enough to listen. It was too distant to identify, yet too clear to dismiss as imagination. Captain Thornton stepped out from his cabin carrying the ship's lantern. What is it? Several men pointed toward the black horizon. The captain listened. Nothing. Only the slow splash of waves against the hull. The mysterious sound had vanished. He stood quietly for another minute before speaking. Resume the watch. No further discus. Sion followed. Out here, strange noises belonged to the sea as naturally as wind belonged to the sky. Veteran sailors had learned that chasing every mystery usually wasted time better spent tending the ship. Still, once the captain disappeared below, whispers returned. Hands crossed himself. Miguel merely shook his head. Patrick scratched at his graying beard. You'll hear many things before this voyage ends. Ghosts, you asked. Patrick snorted. No. What then? Wood, wind, fog, birds, men whose minds have stayed at sea too long. Miguel looked up from the rope he was coiling. And sometimes bells. Nobody laughed. Not because they believed in ghosts, but because the Atlantic often produced sounds that seemed impossible to explain. Fog could bend noise in strange directions. The cry of a distant seabird might resemble a child calling for help. Loose iron fittings could ring like church bells whenever waves struck the hull in just the right rhythm. Most sailors preferred ordinary explanations. Not all of them found comfort in those explanations. The watch ended shortly before dawn. A cold mist settled across the water, reducing visibility until the bow disappeared into whiteness. The world shrank. Yesterday, the ocean had stretched endlessly in every direction. Now it seemed to end barely 50 yards from the ship. The helmsman relied almost entirely on the compass. Without landmarks, every direction appeared identical. You had seen compasses before. Never had one seemed so important. The tiny needle quietly carried the confidence of everyone aboard. If it failed, the Atlantic offered no roads, no villages, no church towers to guide lost travelers. Only water. Captain Thornton ordered the ship's bell struck every few minutes. Its deep tone rolled through the fog before dissolving into silence. You suddenly understood the mysterious ringing from the previous night. Somewhere beyond the mist, another ship might be doing exactly the same thing. Neither vessel wished to meet unexpectedly. Collisions happened more often than many people imagined. A merchant ship could survive storms only to sink because another hull emerged from the fog too late. The crew moved carefully throughout the morning. Voices remained lower than usual. Even routine jobs seemed quieter beneath the heavy blanket of mist. Sound behaved strangely. Sometimes a whispered conversation carried farther than a shout. Other noises seemed swallowed immediately. Around midday, the lookout called down, "Porpoises." Several sailors hurried toward the rail. You joined them. Gray shapes slipped effortlessly through the water beside the ship. They surfaced together, exhaled with soft bursts of mist, then disappeared beneath the waves before emerging again farther ahead. Unlike the crew, they appeared completely at home. One leaped clear of the sea. Another followed. For several minutes, they raced the asterisk Providence as though amused by the slow wooden vessel. Patrick smiled. They're good company. You like them. They usually mean healthy waters. Miguel nodded. And sometimes they warn of changing weather. Whether that belief held truth or merely tradition hardly mattered. Sailors observed everything. Birds, clouds, currents, the color of the sea. Every small detail might hint at what waited ahead. By afternoon, the fog gradually dissolved beneath strengthening sunlight. Blue patches finally appeared overhead. The Atlantic returned once more. Endless. magnificent, unforgiving. The carpenter called several younger sailors together, including you. The pumps. He pointed toward two large wooden pump handles extending through the deck. Until now you had barely noticed them. Every ship leaks. You frowned. Every ship. He laughed. If one doesn't, build a church instead. He explained that even the finest vessels admitted seawater through tiny gaps between planks. Oak expanded and contracted. Caulking loosened. Timbers shifted under constant strain. None of it surprised experienced sailors. It simply meant pumping. Every day. Without exception. You and another sailor took hold of the heavy handles. Up, down, up, down. The mechanism groaned rhythmically. Far below, water slowly rose through hollow pipes before pouring back into the ocean. The work quickly became exhausting. The sweat rolled down your face despite the cool breeze. How long, you asked? Until the bilge is low enough. How long is that? The carpenter shrugged. As long as it takes. Hours later your arms trembled from fatigue. Only then did someone else replace you. You rubbed aching shoulders. So the ship is always leaking. Patrick overheard. Just like every sailor. What does that mean? He grinned. We all let something escape eventually. Hope. Strength. Money. Teeth. Luck. The sea collects a little from everyone. The remark lingered in your thoughts. Looking arrow. On the deck, you noticed signs of those collections. Miguel's scar across one cheek. Patrick's missing fingers. Hands permanently stiff knee. Captain Thornton's cloudy left eye. Each injury represented another voyage. Another story. Another payment made to the Atlantic. Near sunset excitement spread through the crew again. This time the cause floated directly beside the ship. A massive sea turtle drifted lazily upon the surface. The captain ordered a small boat lowered. Not everyone agreed with the decision. Launching boats always carried risk. Fresh meat, however, had become increasingly valuable. 4 sailors climbed into the boat. You watched them row carefully toward the animal. The turtle barely reacted. Within minutes, they secured it and hauled the surprisingly heavy creature back aboard. Some sailors cheered. Others simply nodded with satisfaction. The cook smiled more broadly than anyone. That evening, everyone enjoyed soup unlike anything served since leaving England. Fresh meat. Rich broth. Even the mood aboard seemed lighter. The ship's surgeon insisted the meal would help prevent illness. Whether true or not, nobody complained. After dinner, Captain Thornton invited the first mate and navigator into his cabin. The door remained partly open. Charts covered the table. A brass compass rested beside several measuring instruments. You caught glimpses while carrying empty barrels nearby. The navigator repeatedly marked small positions across the parchment. No satellites. No engines. Only mathematics. The noon sun. The stars. The compass. A carefully kept log recording speed and direction. Every day's position represented an educated estimate rather than certainty. One mistake repeated over several weeks might leave a ship dozens of miles from where its captain believed it to be. You suddenly appreciated why experienced navigators earned such respect. A poor sailor endangered himself. A poor navigator endangered everyone. That night, Edward's condition worsened. His foot had swollen dramatically despite the surgeon's efforts. Fever flushed his face. He spoke nonsense while half asleep. The surgeon changed the bandages again. The smell had grown stronger. You noticed genuine concern in his expression for the first time. Patrick quietly approached afterward. Will he recover? The surgeon hesitated. I hope so. Hope. Not confidence. Just hope. Medicine aboard ship remained painfully limited. Knowledge existed. Tools existed. Experience existed. Yet infection often ignored them all. Several sailors volunteered to cover Edward's duties. Nobody wished to burden the injured man further. Life aboard the Providence demanded cooperation. One sailor's weakness became everyone else's responsibility. Not because kindness always prevailed, because survival required it. Later, while standing the middle watch, you looked upward. The clouds had completely disappeared. Thousands upon thousands of stars filled the sky. You had never seen so many from your village. Out here, there were no church windows glowing in the distance. No farmhouse lanterns. No smoke. Only darkness and stars reflected upon black water until it became impossible to tell where heaven ended and the Atlantic began. The helmsman nodded toward the sky. See that? He pointed to a bright star hanging low above the northern horizon. The captain trusts that one nearly as much as the compass. You watched quietly. The idea fascinated you. Men crossing an ocean by following lights that had existed long before any kingdom now sailing beneath them. The sea changed. Empires rose. Kings died. The stars remained. Somewhere after midnight, a loud splash interrupted the silence. Every head turned. A large shape rolled beside the ship. Then another. Whales. Not the enormous monsters described in tavern tales, but still larger than any creature you had imagined. Their backs glistened beneath starlight. One exhaled a towering column of mist with a deep, thunderous breath that echoed across the calm sea. The crew fell silent. Even Captain Thornton emerged from his cabin to watch. For several minutes, the giants traveled alongside the Providence asterisk. Slow, graceful, completely indifferent to the tiny wooden ship. Then they descended together into darkness. The ocean closed above them. Nothing remained except widening circles upon the water. Miguel broke the silence. They've crossed this ocean more times than all of us combined. No one argued. As you returned your gaze to the empty sea, it struck you just how small the Providence truly was. A single wooden vessel carrying a few dozen fragile lives across one of the largest stretches of water on Earth. And the voyage had only just begun. The following morning began with a sound you had not heard before. Not thunder, not the cry of gulls, not the creaking of timber. It was coughing. At first only one sigh. Lord. Then another. Then several more from different corners of the berth deck. Short, dry coughs that echoed beneath the low beams before fading into the familiar groans of the ship. You paid little attention until Patrick noticed you listening. Don't worry yet. Yet. The air below deck. He glanced toward the damp ceiling. It rots a man's lungs if he breathes enough of it. The sleeping quarters never truly dried. Even after bright afternoons, moisture remained trapped inside the wooden hull. Blankets absorbed it, hammocks held it, boots never completely lost it. Everything smelled permanently damp. Combined with smoke drifting down from the galley and the breath of nearly 40 men sleeping in a confined space, the air became heavy enough to taste. The surgeon encouraged everyone to spend as much time on deck as duties allowed. Fresh air, he claimed, was medicine no captain had to purchase. After breakfast, Captain Thornton assembled the crew. The wind had weakened considerably overnight. The sails hung lazily, filling only now and then with enough breeze to keep the Providence moving. This won't last forever, the captain said. So today we prepare. The order puzzled you. Prepare for what? The sky looked peaceful. The sea rolled gently beneath pale sunshine. Patrick answered before you could ask. When the weather is kind, sailors repair. And when the weather is cruel, he smiled thinly. And they wished they had. The entire day became one long lesson in maintenance. You helped replace worn sections of rigging. Each rope seemed to have its own purpose and its own name. Halyards, sheets, braces, stays. Lines that looked identical to your inexperienced eyes performed completely different jobs. Mistake one for another during a storm, and the consequences could become deadly. The bosun insisted every sailor memorize them. Your hands must know where to reach before your mind has time to think. It sounded impossible. By evening, you had begun recognizing several without hesitation. Slowly, the impossible became routine. Later, the carpenter summoned you below. The lower hold felt entirely different from the upper deck. Cooler. Darker. The smell of salt gave way to oak, hemp, damp grain, and stored cargo. Lantern light danced across stacked barrels lashed securely against movement. Sugar. Flour. Iron tools. Bundles of cloth. Crates filled with trade goods destined for colonies thousands of miles away. Every item had been packed with astonishing care. Heavy cargo remained low. Lighter cargo rested higher. Balance mattered. A poorly loaded ship could roll dangerously in rough weather. The carpenter stopped beside several large casks. Listen. You heard nothing unusual. He tapped one barrel gently. A hollow sound answered. This one's leaking. You leaned closer. A thin trickle of fresh water escaped around one wooden hoop before disappearing between the planks. Not much. Only drops. Yet every drop represented something precious. Repairs began immediately. A hot pitch sealed the leak while iron hoops were tightened carefully. The carpenter wiped sweat from his forehead. Out here, he rested one hand upon the barrel. And water is worth more than silver. His words proved true the following afternoon. Each sailor received the daily water ration. You expected another full mug. Instead, the quartermaster measured it carefully into smaller wooden cups. No more. No less. Several newcomers emptied theirs immediately. Patrick shook his head. Slowly. I'm thirsty. You'll be thirstier later. He poured a little into his mouth before holding the remainder. Learn to make it last. The lesson felt cruel. Yet as hours passed beneath a strengthening sun, you understood. Your tongue longed for another drink. None would come until tomorrow. Experienced sailors accepted discomfort the way farmers accepted winter. Complaining changed nothing. During the second dog watch, the lookout shouted again. Birds. Small white shapes circled above the ship. Unlike the gulls that had followed them from England, these birds looked unfamiliar. Long, narrow wings. Sharp black beaks. They skimmed effortlessly above the waves. Miguel watched them with interest. We're farther west now. So these are different. They belong here. Simple observations like that fascinated you. Sailors rarely needed maps to sense progress. Birds changed. Currents changed. The color of the sea shifted subtly. Floating seaweed appeared where none had existed before. Nature quietly marked the miles. That evening, the cook announced a surprise. Peas pudding flavored with onions. Fresh onions. Only a handful remained aboard, carefully stored since departure. The surgeon insisted they be eaten before spoiling completely. Several sailors joked that the smell alone could defeat disease. Nobody refused a serving. The onions transformed the other. Wise ordinary meal into something almost luxurious. You found yourself thinking about how quickly expectations had changed. Back home, such food would hardly deserve mention. At sea, it became an event. After supper, the navigator invited you onto the quarterdeck. You assumed he needed assistance. Instead, he pointed toward the setting sun. Do you know why I write every news? You admitted you did not. He removed a polished brass instrument from its wooden case. The sextant caught the last golden light beautifully. We measure the sun, the angle between the sun and the horizon. He spoke patiently, perhaps remembering his own first voyage. That tells us how far north or south we've traveled. And east or west. His expression became thoughtful. That, he smiled faintly. It is much harder. He explained dead reckoning. Speed estimated by the log line. Course maintained by compass. Days carefully recorded in the logbook. Everything depended upon accuracy. Every unnoticed current. Every mistaken calculation. Every hour of unexpected wind gradually pushed the ship away from where the chart believed it to be. No navigator is perfect. He closed the sextant gently. We simply try to be less wrong tomorrow than we were yesterday. The honesty impressed you. The Atlantic rewarded confidence only when accompanied by humility. That night, Edward called for his mother. The sound spread quietly through the berth deck. At first, you assumed he had awakened from a dream. Then you realized his eyes remained closed. Fever. The surgeon cooled his forehead with damp cloths. Miguel whispered a prayer in Spanish. Patrick sat nearby without speaking. Even Captain Thornton visited briefly. He asked only one question. Any improvement? The surgeon answered with silence. Sometimes silence carried more truth than words. The following morning, Edward could no longer stand. His duties officially ended. Others divided them among themselves without complaint. Nobody knew whether he would recover. Nobody knew whether he would survive long enough to see land again. Death aboard ship often arrived gradually. Not always through spectacular storms. Sometimes through exhaustion. Sometimes through illness. Sometimes through wounds too small to fear until fear became useless. Around midday, the sea transformed unexpectedly. Its deep blue surface faded into brilliant patches of turquoise. The change startled you. Why the color, you asked. Hands leaned over the rail. Shallower water. So we're near land. He laughed. No. Then. Different currents. The Atlantic possessed countless hidden rivers flowing within itself. Warm water. Cold water. Each carrying its own life. Its own fish. Its own weather. Invisible highways that experienced sailors learned to recognize. Late that afternoon, excitement spread across the crew once again. Flying fish. At first you thought someone was joking. Then a glittering shape burst from the sea. Instead of falling immediately, it glided astonishingly far above the waves before disappearing back into the water. Another followed. Then another. Several accidentally landed on deck. The sailors quickly gathered them. Fresh food never went to waste. You picked one up. Its fins resembled delicate wings. Nature seemed full of impossible inventions. Miguel chuckled. The first time I saw those. He held one toward the sunlight. And I thought the ocean had learned to throw birds. As darkness settled, the wind freshened once more. Not violently. Just enough to fill the sails firmly. The Providence leaned gently to port and gathered speed. The bow sliced confidently through rolling swells. For the first time since leaving England, the ship seemed almost eager. You stood the first night watch with Patrick. Neither of you spoke for several minutes. The stars reflected upon calm water. The sails breathed overhead. Finally, Patrick broke the silence. You're changing. I am. You don't walk like a farmer anymore. You look down instinctively. I don't. No. You walk like the deck is moving. He smiled. Even when it isn't. The realization surprised you. Without noticing, your body had adapted to the constant rhythm of the sea. Your balance, your stride, even the way you reached automatically for nearby rope whenever climbing. The Atlantic had begun reshaping you. Not only your muscles, your instincts, your habits, perhaps even your thoughts. Far ahead, beyond the circle of lantern lights surrounding the Providence asterisk, the darkness remained complete. Somewhere beyond that darkness lay the colonies. Busy ports, unknown coastlines, opportunity, disease, fortunes, failure. No sailor aboard knew exactly what awaited them. But as the steady wind carried the ship westward through the night, one thing became increasingly clear. The greatest challenge of crossing the Atlantic was not Merrill. Why surviving the ocean? It was enduring everything the voyage slowly took away before land finally returned to the horizon. The days that followed settled into a rhythm so predictable that you almost forgot how quickly the Atlantic could change its temper. The bell divided every hour. The watches divided every day. Meals arrived at nearly the same time. Repairs never seemed to end. The ship moved westward with quiet determination, rising and falling over endless swells that looked almost identical to those of yesterday. Yet beneath that routine, subtle changes continued. Your hands no longer blistered. The skin had hardened into thick calluses that scarcely noticed rough hemp. Climbing the shrouds no longer filled you with dread. Your feet automatically widened their stance whenever the deck rolled. Even the smell that had once made your stomach turn, tar mixed with salt, smoke, damp oak, and humanity, had become ordinary. You wondered how many changes a man could undergo before he stopped being the person who had boarded the ship at Bristol. One morning, the bosun tossed a coil of rope toward you. "Splice it." You stared blankly. "I've never." "I know." He crouched beside you and separated the thick strands with a marlin spike. A broken rope doesn't always need replacing. His fingers worked with astonishing speed. Each strand disappeared beneath another. Then another. Soon the damaged section looked almost untouched. He handed the rope back. "Now you." Your first attempt resembled a tangled nest more than proper seamanship. The bosun untied every strand without complaint. Again and again. Nearly an hour passed before he finally nodded. "Ugly." You sighed. "I know. But it'll hold." That was enough. Beauty meant very little aboard a working ship. Strength meant everything. Just before noon, a cry came from the galley. "Fire!" Every sailor froze. For one terrifying heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the entire ship exploded into action. Unlike storms, fire offered almost no warning. A wooden ship carried tar, pitch, rope, canvas, dry timber, lamp oil, and gunpowder. Together, they formed a floating bonfire, waiting for a single mistake. You reached the galley expecting towering flames. Instead, you found smoke pouring from beneath the stove. The cook had lost control of hot coals after the ship lurched unexpectedly. Burning embers had spilled across nearby wood. Buckets appeared almost instantly. Sand followed. Within moments, the flames died. The danger had lasted perhaps 2 minutes. Your heart continued racing much longer. Captain Thornton inspected the scorched planks personally. No lasting damage. Only then did the crew relax. Patrick wiped soot from his beard. I fear fire more than storms. Really? A storm gives you a chance. He glanced toward the blackened wood. Fire rarely does. The incident changed the atmosphere aboard. Lanterns were checked twice before nightfall. The galley stove received additional securing chains. Every sailor understood how close disaster could hide behind an ordinary afternoon. Edward remained alive. Barely. The fever came and went in waves. Some mornings he recognized everyone. By evening, he no longer remembered where he was. The surgeon changed dressings regularly. The swelling in his foot had spread higher. You noticed the crew speaking more quietly whenever passing his hammock. No one wished to disturb him. No one wished to admit what they were thinking either. Several days later, rain arrived. Not violent. Not dangerous. Simply steady. The crew welcomed it with surprising enthusiasm. Canvas sheets were stretched across sections of the deck to collect fresh water. Barrels stood ready beneath every corner. The rain that soaked your clothes also replenished precious supplies. Some sailors tilted back their heads and laughed while cold drops washed salt from their faces. Miguel opened his mouth toward the sky like a delighted child. The best drink in the Atlantic. Nobody disagreed. For the first time in weeks, everyone drank without measuring each swallow. The rain continued until evening. When it finally stopped, the barrels contained enough fresh water for Captain Thornton to restore the normal daily ration. Morale improved immediately. Sometimes hope arrived disguised as ordinary weather. The following morning, the sea became strangely alive. Tiny silver fish surrounded the asterisk Providence in enormous schools. They flashed beneath the surface like scattered coins. Soon larger fish appeared. Then dolphins. Then birds diving from above. The ocean erupted into frantic movement. What started it, you asked? Hands leaned over the rail. The little ones. The small fish. They're fleeing. From what? Before he could answer, the sea itself provided the explanation. A tremendous splash erupted 50 yards away. Another. Then another. Dark fins sliced through the water. Sharks. Not one. Several. They moved with calm confidence, weaving effortlessly through the chaos. The smaller fish scattered in every direction. The dolphins vanished. Even the birds climbed higher. Within minutes, the Atlantic returned to its previous calm, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Miguel scratched his chin. The sea has kings too. That afternoon, Captain Thornton ordered fishing lines over the side. The long hemp cords disappeared into deep blue water, each carrying heavy hooks baited with salted meat. Fishing aboard ship demanded patience. The Atlantic owed sailors nothing. Hours passed. Then one line jerked violently. 4 men hauled together. The fish fought with astonishing strength. It surged beneath the hull before racing away again, pulling the rope so tightly it hummed. Finally, a gleaming tuna emerged beside the ship. Its body shimmered with blue and silver beneath the afternoon sun. The crew cheered. Fresh food again. The cook wasted no time. That evening, thick slices sizzled over the galley fire while the smell drifted across the deck. Even Captain Thornton accepted a second helping. Conversation lingered longer after supper. Stories replaced silence. Hans spoke of frozen Baltic winters. Miguel described Caribbean waters so clear that anchors seemed suspended in air. Patrick remembered a voyage during which icebergs drifted farther south than anyone expected. You mostly listened. Every sailor carried a lifetime of oceans inside his memory. The ship itself seemed to encourage storytelling. Perhaps because endless horizons left room for reflection. Perhaps because men worked better together after sharing pieces of themselves. Late one afternoon, the first mate called you to the quarterdeck. You read. A little. He handed you the ship's logbook. Its pages smelled faintly of ink and salt. Neat handwriting filled every line. Date. Estimated position. Wind direction. Sea condition. Distance sailed. Repairs completed. Supplies consumed. Occasional remarks. One entry from several weeks earlier caught your attention. Heavy weather lost 1 boat, 3 water casks damaged, crew preserved through God's mercy. Just 1 sentence. You thought back to that terrifying night. The screaming wind. The crashing waves. The injured sailor. The endless labor. All of it reduced to a few calm words. The first mate noticed your expression. A log isn't a story. What is it? A memory. He closed the book gently. So the next captain knows what happened. The simplicity fascinated you. Great suffering often survived history only as brief notes in faded ink. Toward sunset, another unexpected task arrived. The sails required tarring. You had assumed tar belonged only on ropes. The sailmaker corrected you. The small sections of canvas received protective treatment around seams and reinforcements. The work proved messy beyond imagination. Black pitch coated your fingers, your sleeves, even your hair. No amount of scrubbing removed it completely. Patrick laughed when he saw your face. Now you smell like the ship. I already did. No. He shook his head. Now the ship smells like you. That night the moon rose nearly full. Its pale light transformed the Atlantic into rippling silver. You volunteered for an extra hour on deck simply to enjoy the view. The sea looked peaceful, almost gentle. It became difficult to believe this same water had threatened to destroy the asterisk Providence only weeks earlier. Miguel joined you quietly. Beautiful. It is. He leaned against the rail. That's how she fools people. You looked at him. The sea. He nodded. She never stays the same long enough for anyone to understand her. His words echoed in your thoughts as the watch continued. Around midnight, a sudden cry shattered the calm. Man overboard. Every sailor spun toward the starboard side. A lantern swung wildly above the rail. Someone had vanished into the black water. The ship continued moving. The wind still filled the sails. Captain Thornton roared orders that sent the crew scrambling in every direction. A life buoy splashed into the sea. Lanterns were raised higher. Men strained their eyes into the darkness, searching desperately for any sign of the missing sailor. For several endless seconds, no one saw anything at all. Hard to starboard. The helmsman threw his entire weight against the great tiller. The Providence answered slowly. Far too slowly. Unlike the small fishing boats of your childhood river, an ocean-going merchant brig could not pivot in an instant. She carried hundreds of tons of timber, cargo, water, provisions, and human lives. Momentum had become its own force, and momentum obeyed neither fear nor desperation. Captain Thornton pointed into the darkness. Lanterns over the side. The three sailors leaned far beyond the rail, lowering bright lanterns until they nearly touched the waves. Their trembling reflections danced across the black Atlantic, revealing nothing except restless water. Did anyone see him? Silence. Then one uncertain voice. I think it was Thomas. You think? It happened too fast. The captain's jaw tightened. Throw another buoy. A second cork-filled life buoy splashed into the sea. You rushed to the rail beside Patrick, your eyes straining against the darkness. Every wave looked like a human head for a heartbeat before dissolving into foam. Every shadow became hope, then disappointment. Listen, Patrick whispered. The crew fell almost completely silent. The ship creaked. The sails snapped gently overhead. Water slid along the hull. Nothing else. Then, a faint cry. So here. It was distant. Painfully distant. There, someone shouted. You caught sight of a single arm rising above the water before disappearing again between the swells. Captain Thornton acted instantly. Lower the jolly boat. No one questioned the order. 4 sailors raced toward the davits. The small boat swung outward, crashing lightly against the hull as ropes paid out. 2 experienced oarsmen climbed aboard, followed by Miguel and the first mate. You stay aboard, Patrick warned as you instinctively stepped forward. I can help. You'll help more here. The boat struck the water with a splash. Cast off. Within seconds, it disappeared into the darkness, guided only by the lantern hanging from its bow. Everyone aboard the Providence watched. Nobody spoke. The cries came again. Weaker now. The Atlantic stole strength astonishingly fast. Even in summer, its water remained cold enough to numb arms within minutes. The rescue boat disappeared behind a swell. For one terrifying moment, its lantern vanished completely. Several sailors gripped the rail harder. Then the light returned. A cheer almost escaped the crew. Almost. No one celebrated before the man was safely aboard. Minutes stretched unbearably. The Providence drifted under shortened sail while the rescue unfolded. Finally, a shout echoed across the water. "We've got him." Relief swept over the deck like a warm breeze. The rowers turned immediately, pulling with powerful strokes toward the waiting ship. As the boat drew alongside, you finally saw the rescued sailor. Thomas, one of the youngest able seamen aboard. He lay curled in the bottom of the boat, coughing violently. His face had turned almost gray. Water poured from every piece of clothing he wore. The crew hauled him aboard with surprising gentleness. The surgeon arrived before Thomas's boots touched the deck. Blankets. Dry clothes. No rum yet. Several sailors carried Thomas below, while others returned the boat to its davits. Only once everything had been secured did Captain Thornton ask the question everyone wanted answered. How? Thomas struggled to speak through chattering teeth. He swallowed painfully and slipped. No dramatic accident. No broken rope. No collapsing mast. Simply one wet plank beneath one tired sailor. Patrick exhaled slowly. The sea nearly collected another. The surgeon ordered everyone, except his assistants, away from the berth deck. Hours later, Thomas regained enough strength to explain more clearly. He had been carrying a lantern during the watch. The deck remained damp from evening dew. One careless step. One moment without gripping the lifeline. Then nothing beneath his feet except the Atlantic. He admitted something that chilled you more than the water itself. I never heard myself fall. What do you mean? Asked Hans. The ship kept moving. Thomas stared blankly at the deck. 1 second I was aboard. The next, he paused, and the ship was already sailing away. The realization settled heavily over the crew. The Atlantic did not announce disaster. It simply waited. Captain Thornton addressed everyone the following morning. No man walks this deck at night without one hand free. He raised his own hand. One hand for the ship. He tapped the rail. One hand for yourself. The phrase spread quickly among the crew. Soon every experienced sailor repeated it to newcomers. One hand for the ship. One hand for yourself. Simple words. Hard-earned wisdom. Thomas remained weak for several days. The cold had settled deep inside his chest. His coughing grew harsher each morning. The surgeon listened carefully before finally nodding. He'll live. A smile crossed several weary faces. Good news had become uncommon enough to feel almost miraculous. Life aboard gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. The carpenter repaired a cracked hatch cover. The sailmaker finished reinforcing the storm-damaged topsail. The cook salted the remaining tuna to preserve it for future meals. Every task flowed into the next with quiet efficiency. One afternoon, Captain Thornton ordered the log line prepared. You had heard sailors mention it many times, but had never seen it used properly. The first mate held up a curious wooden object shaped like a narrow triangle. "This tells us our speed." He attached it to a long rope marked with evenly spaced knots. When the signal came, the wooden log disappeared over the stern. Unlike the ship, it remained nearly motionless in the water. The rope rushed through the sailor's hands. Another crewman turned a small sand glass. Exactly 28 seconds. No more. No less. Stop. The rope was grabbed firmly. The first mate counted the knots that had passed overboard. 5. He made a note in the logbook. 5 knots. You frowned. So that's where the word comes from. He smiled. Exactly. A sailor could measure speed without seeing land. Without clocks. Without engines. Only rope. Wood. Sand. And practice. The Atlantic demanded cleverness as much as courage. Days later, the wind freshened steadily from the east. The Providence surged forward. White foam streamed continuously along both sides of the hull. The sails filled beautifully. Even Captain Thornton appeared quietly pleased. "We're making excellent time." Those words lifted everyone's spirits. Every extra mile meant fewer days before reaching land. Fewer days eating salted meat. Fewer nights sleeping in damp hammocks. Fewer opportunities for sickness or storms. Hope itself seemed lighter. That evening, you climbed into the rigging just before sunset. The bosun had finally trusted you with lookout duty. The view stole your breath. From high above the deck, the Atlantic stretched in every direction without interruption. The curve of the earth became almost imaginable. Far below, the Providence looked surprisingly small. A handful of men. A forest of masts. A narrow trail of white wake disappearing into the endless blue behind. You suddenly understood why experienced sailors respected the ocean so deeply. From SH, or it appeared vast. From the masthead, it seemed almost infinite. A dark shape caught your attention far to the southwest. At first, you assumed it was another cloud. Then it moved. Slowly. Purposefully. You raised the small spyglass hanging from your shoulder. A ship. Large. Larger than the Providence asterisk. Its sails stood sharply against the evening sky. You called down immediately. Sailed to the southwest. Captain Thornton accepted the report without visible alarm. He climbed halfway into the rigging himself before studying the stranger through his brass telescope. Long moments passed. The crew waited below. Finally, he descended. Maintain course. No further explanation. The distant vessel remained visible until darkness swallowed the horizon. Some sailors believed it to be another merchantman. Others suspected a naval frigate. Miguel quietly suggested it might even be a privateer. Nobody truly knew. At sea, distance concealed as much as darkness. The following dawn, the strange ship had disappeared. Whether it had changed course or simply sailed beyond the horizon remained impossible to tell. Yet its brief appearance reminded everyone aboard of another truth. Storms were not the only danger crossing the Atlantic. Some threats carried sails of their own. And hundreds of miles ahead, where the busy shipping lanes grew more crowded with each passing day, the chances of meeting friend or enemy would only increase. For the next 3 days, the wind held steady, carrying the Providence westward at a pace that pleased even the oldest sailors. The sea no longer rolled with the violent, uneven motion left behind by storms. Instead, long blue swells lifted the ship gently before setting her down again with almost comforting regularity. Comfort, however, was a dangerous word aboard an Atlantic vessel. Comfort encouraged carelessness. Carelessness rarely survived very long. By now your body woke before the bells. Long before anyone shouted orders, your eyes opened automatically. The rhythm of the ship had become a second heartbeat. The groan of the hull, the flutter of canvas overhead, the soft knock of loose tackle against the mast, these sounds no longer disturbed your sleep. They had become home. That realization unsettled you more than you expected. Only a month earlier, you had measured your days by church bells echoing across fields. Now you measured them by the changing watches of a wooden ship somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. The bosun noticed your improvement. You'll climb the foremast today. You looked upward. The mast seemed taller than ever. Its highest yard appeared no wider than a man's shoulders. You trust me. I trust the rope. He handed you a safety line. And I trust you'll remember what happens if you forget it. That was as close to encouragement as the bosun ever offered. The climb demanded patience more than strength. Each ratline felt secure until the ship rolled unexpectedly. Then the mast leaned several feet to one side before slowly swinging back. Halfway up, you made the mistake of glancing downward. The deck suddenly looked impossibly far away. Men became little moving figures. Barrels resembled children's toys. Patrick's voice floated upward. Keep looking where you're going. You immediately returned your attention to the rigging. At the top, the wind felt noticeably stronger. The sails snapped loudly only a few feet away. You wrapped one arm around the mast and allowed yourself a single careful look across the horizon. Nothing. No ships. No birds. Only the endless Atlantic stretching beneath a brilliant morning sky. It amazed you that so much emptiness could exist in one place. When you finally climbed down, your legs trembled. The bosun nodded. You didn't freeze. I nearly did. But you didn't. That mattered. Fear itself was not considered weakness. Allowing fear to control your hands was. Later that afternoon, Captain Thornton ordered a full inspection of the cargo. You joined the first mate below deck. Several barrels had shifted slightly despite being securely lashed. Heavy seas had a way of testing every knot aboard. One by one, the cargo was examined. Sugar remained dry. Flour showed no signs of spoilage. Iron tools had developed only a light coating of rust. Then the first mate stopped beside a stack of barrels marked with a merchant's seal. Tobacco. He pried open the lid carefully. The rich, earthy smell filled the hold almost immediately. Inside, tightly packed leaves remained perfectly dry. He smiled for the first time that day. The investors will be pleased. You had never considered the voyage from that perspective. To you, the ship carried supplies. To wealthy merchants waiting across the ocean, every barrel represented profit. Every delay cost money. Every damaged crate reduced someone's fortune. The first mate seemed to read your thoughts. Ships don't cross scenes for adventure. He closed the barrel again. They cross for trade. The sentence stayed with you long after returning to the deck. The stories told in taverns celebrated brave captains and dangerous storms. Very few celebrated cargo. Yet cargo paid wages. Cargo built ports. Cargo financed empires. Without it, ships like the asterisk Providence would never leave harbor. That evening, the wind eased slightly. Captain Thornton decided to hold navigation lessons for several younger sailors. You gathered around the quarterdeck while the navigator spread a chart across a small table. It looked strangely empty. Large portions of the Atlantic contained almost nothing except faint compass lines and occasional notes warning of shoals near distant coasts. So much blank space, you observed. The navigator smiled. The ocean has little interest in decoration. He pointed toward a tiny mark. This is where we departed. Then he traced a line stretching westward. And this is where we believe we are. You noticed his choice of words. Believe. Not know. How close are we? He shrugged. Perhaps within 10 miles. You looked impressed. Or perhaps within 30. The uncertainty seemed enormous. He folded the chart. It only becomes dangerous if we're wrong near land. The Atlantic forgave small mistakes. Coastlines rarely did. Near sunset, the lookout spotted something floating ahead. At first, everyone assumed it to be driftwood. As the ship approached, the object became clearer. A broken mast. Its top had splintered violently. Fragments of torn sail still clung to the shattered spar. Captain Thornton ordered the ship slightly closer. No voices called for help. No wreckage surrounded it. Only the lonely mast drifted silently with the current. Miguel removed his hat. No survivors. You know that. Patrick answered before Miguel could. If men were alive. He looked toward the empty sea. They'd have stayed with it. The broken timber slid slowly past the hull before disappearing astern. No one spoke for several minutes afterward. Every sailor imagined the same question. What had happened? Storm. Collision. Fire. Pirates. The Atlantic offered no explanation. Only evidence. Small pieces of forgotten tragedies floating across thousands of miles of open water. That night you found it difficult to sleep. The image of the shattered mast lingered in your thoughts. Somewhere, perhaps weeks earlier, another crew had fought desperately to save their ship. Perhaps they had succeeded. Perhaps they had not. The ocean rarely left witnesses. The following morning, Edward surprised everyone by sitting upright without assistance. His fever had finally broken. The surgeon examined him carefully before allowing a cautious smile. The infection is retreating. Word spread quickly. Men who had quietly prepared themselves for another burial at sea suddenly carried fresh optimism. Edward himself looked exhausted beyond measure. He had lost considerable weight. His face appeared older. Yet he was alive. Patrick squeezed his shoulder gently. The Atlantic changed its mind. Edward managed a weak laugh. I hope she doesn't change it back. Although his foot would take many weeks to heal, his recovery lifted the spirit of the entire crew. Life aboard ship rarely offered victories. Even small ones deserved appreciation. The weather remained favorable. Flying fish appeared almost daily now. Sea turtles occasionally surfaced near the bow before disappearing again beneath the waves. One afternoon, a flock of small birds circled the masts briefly before continuing west. Miguel watched them disappear. Land isn't close, but it's closer than it was. Simple observations like that gradually built anticipation. Every passing day shortened the distance between the Providence and her destination. Every sunrise carried the crew farther from England and nearer to an unknown coast. Just after the evening meal, Captain Thornton called everyone onto the main deck. His expression remained serious. We've made good progress. Several sailors exchanged hopeful glances. If the wind remains with us. He paused. And we should soon enter waters where merchant traffic becomes much heavier. That sounded encouraging. More ships meant civilization. More ships meant assistance if needed. The captain continued. It also means greater caution. The hopeful expressions faded. Privateers hunt these routes. Nobody interrupted him. They carry legal papers in wartime. He looked around the assembled crew. The pirates carry none. The distinction mattered little to captured merchants. We are not armed for battles. The Providence possessed only a handful of small cannon, intended more to discourage than to defeat attackers. Her greatest defense remained speed and good judgment. Captain Thornton dismissed the crew. Conversation resumed almost immediately. Hans believed most pirate stories were exaggerated. Miguel disagreed. Patrick listened quietly before finally speaking. The dangerous pirates aren't the famous ones. What do you mean? You asked. The famous ones are already dead. Nobody argued with that. Long careers rarely existed in piracy. Luck eventually ran out. Justice or rival crews usually caught up with those who lived by violence. Still, the possibility lingered in every sailor's mind as darkness settled over the Atlantic once again. Later, while standing the middle watch, you noticed an unusual glow low upon the western horizon. Not lightning, not moonlight, something softer, almost golden. You pointed it out to the helmsman. He studied it silently for several moments. Then he called quietly toward the quarterdeck. "Captain." Thornton emerged almost immediately. One look was enough. He lifted his telescope, though the distance made it nearly useless in darkness. Finally, he lowered it again. "Keep our course." "What is it?" you asked. The captain remained silent for a moment before answering. "Either a ship carrying many lanterns." He continued, watching the distant glow. "Or a coastline still too far away to see." No one aboard the Providence knew which possibility waited beyond the darkness. But every sailor understood that the empty heart of the Atlantic was slowly falling behind them. And ahead, the voyage would become more crowded, more complicated, and perhaps even more dangerous. The mysterious glow remained visible for less than an hour. Sometimes it appeared brighter, shimmering just above the horizon. Then it faded until you questioned whether you had imagined it at all. Eventually, darkness swallowed it completely. Captain Thornton gave no further orders. Whatever the light had been, it lay far beyond the reach of the Providence before sunrise. The next morning dawned unusually warm. The sharp chill that had followed the ship since leaving England had almost disappeared. Even the breeze carried a different character now. It felt softer against your face, carrying the faint scent of living water rather than the cold emptiness of the northern Atlantic. Miguel noticed it immediately. "We're farther south than we were. You can smell that." He smiled. "After enough voyages, yes." The old sailor had spent nearly half his life crossing oceans. His senses had become instruments every bit as valuable as the navigator's sextant. The crew worked without coats for the first time since departure. Several men rolled up their sleeves. Blankets hung over the rails to dry completely in the stronger sunshine. For a few precious hours, life aboard the Providence almost resembled peace. Then the captain ordered the gunpowder inspected. The atmosphere changed immediately. Only a handful of small cannons rested along each side of the merchant brig, but every sailor treated them with enormous respect. The gunner unlocked the powder magazine carefully. No lantern entered the compartment. Only daylight. Only soft shoes. Even the smallest spark could destroy the ship. Inside, wooden barrels stood in neat rows. Everything remained perfectly dry. The gunner nodded with satisfaction. "Good." He turned toward you. "You fired a cannon before." You laughed. I've barely seen one. Then watch. The cannon itself looked simple enough. A thick iron barrel mounted upon heavy wooden wheels. Its simplicity proved deceptive. The gunner explained each step slowly. Swab the barrel. Measure the powder. Insert the charge. Ram it home. Add the wadding. Load the shot. Break the cartridge. Prime the touch hole. Every movement followed a precise order developed over generations. Mistakes could cost fingers, sometimes lives. Captain Thornton interrupted before the demonstration ended. We're not looking for battles. He rested one hand upon the cannon. But if battle finds us, he left the sentence unfinished. No one needed him to complete it. That afternoon, another task occupied nearly the entire crew. Barnacles. You had noticed them clinging to floating driftwood before, but never considered what they meant for ships. The carpenter lowered himself over the side using a sturdy bosun's chair while the sea remained calm. Armed with long scrapers, he chipped away at the stubborn shellfish growing along the waterline. They slow us, Hans explained. That much. A dirty hull can steal days from a voyage. The carpenter worked patiently for hours. White shells rained into the sea below. The Atlantic constantly tried reclaiming every vessel crossing it. Salt, rust, barnacles, rot. Nothing escaped forever. Toward evening, dark clouds gathered once again. Not towering storm clouds. Something different. Thin. High. The navigator watched them with growing interest. What do they mean? You asked. Wind. Strong. Tomorrow. His prediction proved correct. Before dawn, the breeze freshened dramatically. By breakfast, the Providence surged westward faster than at any previous point in the voyage. Foam exploded from the bow. The rigging hummed softly beneath constant tension. The ship seemed alive. Even Captain Thornton allowed himself a rare smile. This is a sailor's wind. Every mile gained today reduced the chance of meeting autumn storms farther west. The faster they crossed, the safer everyone remained. Not all sailors shared the captain's optimism. Edward still limped badly despite recovering from his fever. His wound had closed, yet every step reminded him how close he had come to losing far more than his health. While helping him coil rope, you asked quietly, "Will you sail again after this voyage?" He looked toward the endless horizon. "I don't know. You've spent years at sea." "I have. So why stop now?" He considered the question carefully. "When I was your age." He smiled faintly. "I believed every voyage made me richer. And now I wonder how many years I've traded for those wages." His answer lingered long after the conversation ended. Money seemed valuable in port. Time seemed valuable at sea. The Atlantic demanded payment in both. Late that afternoon, the lookout called down, "Say weed." At first, the announcement confused you. Soon, patches of floating brown weed surrounded the ship. Some stretched for dozens of yards. Others drifted alone. Miguel picked up a small clump using a boat hook. Tiny crabs scrambled among its tangled branches. Minute fish darted beneath it. "It's a floating village," he said. The navigator nodded. "We've entered different waters." The sea itself was changing. The currents carried not only water, but entire communities of living creatures across the Atlantic. The floating weed sheltered countless forms of life invisible from a passing ship. Nature wasted nothing. Not then empty ocean. That evening, the cook served an unexpected treat. The tuna caught several days earlier had been carefully smoked over slow fires. Its rich flavor astonished everyone. Conversation became noticeably louder. For a little while, the cramped mess deck almost resembled a gathering back home rather than a group of weary sailors halfway across an ocean. Miguel told a story about meeting indigenous traders during an earlier voyage. Hans argued that Dutch cheese remained superior to English cheese. Patrick insisted no nation brewed ale properly except Ireland. Even Captain Thornton allowed the discussion to continue longer than usual. Small moments of normality became increasingly precious. As darkness settled, the wind remained steady. The stars emerged one by one. Thomas, fully recovered from his fall overboard, joined you on the forecastle. Neither of you spoke immediately. Finally, he broke the silence. "I still dream about the water. You remember falling. Every night." He stared into the darkness beside the hull. "I remember watching the ship sail away." His voice grew quieter. "The strangest part wasn't the cold. What was? The silence." You frowned. It became so quiet. He swallowed. No shouting. No footsteps. Just me and the ocean. The image unsettled you. A man could disappear astonishingly fast. One splash. One misstep. Within moments, even a large ship became only a distant silhouette. Thomas noticed your expression. "I understand now why old sailors touch the rail every time they pass." You had noticed the habit yourself. Many veterans rested one hand briefly upon the ship almost unconsciously while moving about the deck. Respect. Gratitude. Perhaps superstition. Maybe all three. Near midnight, while you stood the second watch, something unusual happened. The wind stopped. Not gradually. Almost at once. The sails collapsed with loud flapping sounds. The steady rush of water along the hull faded. The Providence slowed until she drifted quietly beneath a sky overflowing with stars. The Atlantic became eerily calm. Even the waves seemed to flatten. Captain Thornton emerged from his cabin almost immediately. He looked upward, then outward. No expression crossed his face. Secure everything. The order puzzled several newcomers. There isn't any weather. Patrick answered without taking his eyes from the horizon. Not yet. The air felt strangely heavy. Your shirt clung to your back despite the cool night. The sea reflected every star so perfectly that the ship appeared suspended between two heavens. Beautiful. Unnatural. The stillness continued for nearly an hour. Then, far to the southwest, a flash. Silent. White. Several minutes later, another. Then another. Lightning. But no thunder reached the ship. Miguel watched quietly. Heat lightning. Patrick shook his head. No. Captain Thornton lowered his telescope. Distant storm. The flashes continued through the remainder of the watch, illuminating towering clouds so far away they resembled mountains rising from the sea. The storm never came closer. Instead, it marched slowly northward across the horizon, magnificent and terrifying at the same time. You realize then how vast the Atlantic truly was. Somewhere beyond those distant flashes, another ship might already be fighting for survival while the asterisk Providence floated beneath peaceful stars. The ocean was large enough to hold countless different worlds at once. As dawn finally painted the eastern sky with pale shades of gold, the first breeze of morning returned. The sails filled gently. The Providence resumed her westward journey. None of the crew knew it yet, but before another week had passed, they would enter waters where the greatest danger no longer came from the sea itself. It came from the men who sailed upon it. The sunrise painted the eastern horizon in shades of pale gold and soft crimson, spreading across the Atlantic until every wave seemed edged with molten copper. After the strange stillness of the previous night, the returning breeze felt almost reassuring. The sails filled steadily once more, and the Providence leaned gently as she resumed her westward course. No one spoke much during breakfast. The distant lightning remained in everyone's thoughts. Although the storm had stayed well beyond the horizon, every sailor understood how quickly weather could travel across open water. Captain Thornton studied the morning sky while slowly drinking from a tin cup. Finally, he nodded toward the navigator. "Keep us south." The navigator acknowledged the order without question. Later, curiosity overcame you. "Why south?" The navigator traced an invisible line across the horizon. "Merchant convoys often pass farther north. Wouldn't that be safer?" "Sometimes." He looked toward Captain Thornton. "And sometimes crowded waters attract men looking for easy prizes." You immediately understood his meaning. "Pirates, privateers, smugglers." The Atlantic was not simply a wilderness of wind and waves. It had its own highways, and highways often attracted thieves. By mid-morning, the bosun assigned everyone an unexpected task. Weapons inspection. Not cannons this time. Muskets. Pistols. Boarding axes. Pikes. There were surprisingly few. The Providence had never been built to fight wars. Its owners expected cargo to earn profits, not battles. Still, every merchant captain understood that the ocean did not always respect peaceful intentions. The gunner laid each musket upon a canvas sheet. He dismantled them carefully, cleaning away traces of rust before applying fresh oil. "You'll learn these too." He handed one toward you. The weapon felt heavier than expected. "You ever fired one?" "No." "Good." You blinked. "Good." A man who enjoys firing muskets usually spends too much time fighting. He smiled faintly. "I'd rather you learn and never need it." That sentiment echoed throughout the crew. No sailor aboard wished for combat. Storms were impartial. Men with weapons made choices. Around noon, the lookout shouted from the foremast, "Sail to the east." Everyone looked. A tiny white triangle rested upon the distant horizon. Captain Thornton lifted his brass telescope. He watched silently. The crew waited. Finally, he lowered it. Too far to judge. The strange vessel remained visible throughout the afternoon, sometimes disappearing behind swells, sometimes reappearing brighter beneath the sun. It neither gained upon the Providence nor fell noticeably behind. Instead, it seemed content to follow the same broad route across the Atlantic. Thomas joined you beside the rail. "You think they're watching us?" "I don't know." Miguel overheard. "At sea, everyone watches everyone. Even merchants. Especially merchants." Information carried value. A captain who knew another ship's condition could often guess its cargo, its destination, its speed, sometimes even its vulnerability. Toward evening, the stranger finally altered course. Slowly, deliberately, its sails shifted. Within an hour, it headed southeast until the horizon eventually swallowed it. The tension aboard eased almost immediately. Hands laughed quietly. "We've survived another terrifying afternoon." Patrick shook his head. "You joke now." "I do." "You won't after meeting the wrong ship." No one challenged him. Patrick had spent too many years at sea to dismiss his warnings lightly. The following day began with a strong, favorable wind. The Providence covered remarkable distance. The log line recorded one of the fastest days since leaving Bristol. Even routine work felt easier when the ship moved confidently. The carpenter repaired several loose deck planks. You assisted by carrying fresh oak pegs and heated pitch. Watching him work fascinated you. He rarely measured anything. Instead, he relied upon instinct developed through decades of practice. Every strike of his mallet landed precisely where needed. Every replacement fitted perfectly despite appearing roughly shaped. "You make it look easy." He chuckled. "I make it look familiar." "There is a difference." He handed you a wooden peg. "The sea teaches patience." "What taught you?" He drove another peg firmly into place. "Making mistakes." That answer seemed to describe nearly every experienced sailor aboard. No one became skilled through talent alone. Every lesson had demanded a price. Sometimes embarrassment, sometimes blood, sometimes far worse. That afternoon, something unusual floated alongside the ship. Not driftwood, Not seaweed. A glass bottle. The bosun hooked it from the water using a long boat hook. Immediately, several sailors gathered around. The cork remained firmly in place. Inside rested a tightly rolled piece of paper. Hans grinned. Treasure map. Miguel laughed. Or unpaid debts. The bosun carefully removed the cork with a knife. The paper emerged surprisingly dry. Everyone leaned closer while he unfolded it. The writing had faded badly. Salt and time had claimed much of the ink. Only scattered words remained legible. In God, a storm, pray, Mary. Then nothing. The rest had dissolved into meaningless stains. No signature. No date. No explanation. Captain Thornton studied the fragment briefly. Throw it overboard. Several younger sailors looked disappointed. Why? The captain handed the paper back. Because whoever wrote those words finished his story long ago. The bottle returned quietly to the Atlantic. Soon it disappeared among the waves. You watched until it became invisible. Somewhere, perhaps years earlier, another frightened sailor had trusted the ocean with his final message. Whether anyone had ever been meant to read it remained impossible to know. That evening, the ship's surgeon Ricks. Ted, your help. Edward had begun walking short distances again, but the weakened sailor required assistance changing bandages. The wound looked vastly improved compared to weeks earlier. Healthy pink flesh had replaced the angry swelling. It will scar. Edward smiled. So have I. The surgeon nodded approvingly. Scars are preferable to graves. Simple wisdom. Hard-earned. As sunset approached, birds appeared once more. Not the solitary seabirds occasionally seen days earlier. This time dozens circled overhead. Some rested briefly upon the rigging before continuing west. Miguel watched them carefully. They're feeding. On what? He pointed toward the water. A small fish repeatedly broke the surface. The birds dove with astonishing speed, one after another, rarely missing. Nature seemed to grow busier with each passing day. The empty center of the Atlantic lay behind them now. Life surrounded the ship more frequently. The crew took it as another encouraging sign. Land remained distant. Yet every bird belonged somewhere. No creature wandered forever. After supper, Captain Thornton invited the navigator and first mate into his cabin again. This meeting lasted considerably longer than usual. Charts covered nearly every available surface. Voices remained too quiet to hear clearly. When the officers finally emerged, the captain gathered the crew. We're entering one of the busiest sections of our voyage. Every sailor listened carefully. From this point onward, he paused. In double lookouts. No one complained. Extra watches meant less sleep, but fewer surprises. Thomas whispered beside you. He really expects trouble. Patrick answered before you could. No. What then? He prepares for it. The distinction mattered. Preparation did not require certainty, only wisdom. Night fell beneath a sky crowded with stars. The moon had not yet risen. Darkness spread across the Atlantic more completely than you had ever seen. The double lookouts took their positions, one at the foremast, another atop the mainmast. The helmsman steered by compass, while the navigator checked the stars repeatedly. Everything appeared peaceful, almost too peaceful. Several hours into the middle watch, you noticed Captain Thornton standing alone near the stern. He rarely remained idle. Curiosity drew you closer. He held the brass telescope lowered at his side. "You can't see anything through that in the dark," you said quietly. "No." "Then why carry it?" He continued, looking toward the western horizon. "Because dawn comes quickly." Before you could ask another question, the lookout's voice cut through the silence. "Light ahead." Every head turned westward. At first you saw nothing. Then, a tiny orange point. Steady. Unlike a star. Unlike lightning. It remained low upon the water. Another appeared beside it. Then a third. Captain Thornton raised the telescope instinctively despite the darkness. His expression hardened. "Wake the first mate." Quietly. No bells rang. No shouted orders followed. Only controlled movement spread across the deck. Experienced sailors understood that calm often preceded the most important decisions. Far ahead, the three distant lights continued drifting slowly across the black Atlantic. Too far away to identify. Too deliberate to ignore. Whether they belonged to peaceful merchantmen, a naval patrol, or something far more dangerous, no one aboard the asterisk Providence could yet tell. But for the first time since leaving England, every sailor felt the unmistakable sensation that unseen eyes might also be watching them from beyond the darkness. The three lights remained fixed upon the horizon throughout the remainder of the watch. They neither approached rapidly nor disappeared. Instead, they moved with deliberate patience, rising and falling gently with the swells. Captain Thornton stood motionless beside the helm, his telescope lowered but never far from his hands. He had spent too many years at sea to mistake chance for certainty. No unnecessary orders echoed across the deck. No one panicked. Yet every sailor sensed the subtle change. Conversations became whispers. Footsteps softened. Even the cook, who usually began preparing breakfast before dawn with cheerful complaints about damp firewood, worked quietly that morning. As the eastern sky slowly brightened, the mysterious lights faded one by one. Not because they vanished, because daylight overwhelmed them. The lookout leaned forward from the foremast. "I can see sails." Captain Thornton immediately raised his telescope. Long minutes passed. The crew waited in complete silence. Finally, the captain exhaled. "3 ships. Merchantmen." The first mate asked. "Perhaps." The captain did not sound convinced. The vessels remained too distant for details. Their hulls blended into the morning haze, while only the tops of their sails reflected the risen. Gee, son. They sailed together. That alone attracted attention. Single merchant ships were common. Groups of 3 suggested planning, or protection, or pursuit. The Providence maintained her course. Changing direction too quickly would only invite suspicion. The captain understood something you were only beginning to learn. Out here, confidence often served as camouflage. Late in the morning, the wind strengthened. Canvas snapped overhead. The Providence gathered speed. The 3 distant ships remained visible, though no closer than before. Hands climbed beside you in the rigging. They're matching us. You think so? I know so. He pointed toward the horizon. Notice the distance. You studied carefully. The ships appeared almost frozen against the skyline, neither gaining nor falling back. They're keeping pace. A chill passed through you despite the warm air. Captain Thornton had noticed the same thing. By noon, he ordered the log line overboard again. The first mate counted carefully. 7 knots. A very respectable speed. Yet even at 7 knots, the strangers neither disappeared nor approached. They simply remained, watching. That afternoon, the captain quietly changed course by several degrees. Nothing dramatic. Barely enough for an inexperienced eye to notice. The navigator adjusted the compass heading. The helmsman obeyed. Within an hour, the answer arrived. The 3 ships altered course as well. Almost together. Patrick muttered beneath his breath. So. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone now understood. The ships were not merely traveling in the same direction. They were following. Captain Thornton gathered his officers around the chart table. Their discussion remained private. Meanwhile, the crew continued ordinary work. Ordinary work with extraordinary attention. The gunner completed loading every cannon. Not with round shot. With grape shot. You frowned. I thought cannonballs were stronger. They are. He pushed a canvas bag filled with dozens of iron balls toward the muzzle. But if another ship comes alongside, he rammed the charge firmly. This is what stops men. The explanation required no further detail. Merchant captains hoped never to use such weapons. If they did, the enemy would already be dangerously close. The muskets received fresh powder. Boarding axes appeared beside hatchways. Long pikes rested quietly against the bulwarks. None of it looked dramatic. No speeches. No shouting. Simply preparation. Miguel caught your expression. Is still hoping they're merchants. A little. So am I. He smiled sadly. But hope isn't a plan. Toward evening, the wind eased unexpectedly. Not enough to stop the ship. Enough to reduce her speed. The strangers seemed unaffected. Little by little, almost imperceptibly, they grew larger. By sunset, individual masts became visible. Then sections of hull. Still too far for flags. Still too distant for certainty. But undeniably closer. Captain Thornton ordered every unnecessary lantern extinguished after dark. Only navigation lights remained. The Providence slipped quietly across the black water. Behind her, the wake glowed faintly with tiny blue sparks. You leaned over the rail. What is that? The sea shimmered brilliantly wherever the hull disturbed it. Every wave seemed filled with scattered stars. Miguel smiled. The ocean makes its own light. Tiny living creatures drifted beneath the surface, invisible until disturbed, then suddenly glowing. The ship sailed through liquid constellations, beautiful enough to distract anyone. Perhaps that was why Patrick suddenly grabbed your sleeve. Eyes forward. You looked up immediately. Another light. Closer now. Far closer. Then another. Then several more. Captain Thornton accepted the telescope from the first mate. This time he watched only a few seconds. They've separated. The three ships no longer sailed together. One remained directly astern. The others slowly spread apart, like hunters surrounding prey. Nobody aboard said the word. Pirates. It hung unspoken in every mind. The captain's voice remained calm. Reduce sail. Several younger sailors looked confused. Wouldn't we want more speed? The first mate answered. Not tonight. The explanation came later. Reducing sail during darkness prevented unnecessary strain and accidents. Trying to outrun strangers blindly risked damaging the rigging. A crippled ship at dawn would have no chance at all. Better to preserve strength until daylight revealed the true situation. The crew accepted the decision. Sleep came poorly. Most men rested fully clothed. Weapons remained within reach. Even those off watch found themselves waking repeatedly, listening for unfamiliar sounds. You barely closed your eyes. Just before dawn, the bell marked another watch. A cool mist drifted across the sea. Visibility shrank. The pursuing lights disappeared completely. Some sailors relaxed. Patrick did not. They didn't vanish. They're still there. They know we're here. The fog thickened. The Atlantic became silent once more. No gulls. No dolphins. Even the wind softened. Only the steady splash of water against the hull remained. The lookout strained into the whiteness. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, ship off the port bow. The cry exploded through the fog. Every man rushed toward the rail. Less than half a mile away, a dark hull emerged from the mist like an apparition. Large, black, silent. Its sails hung ghost-like against the pale morning sky. For one endless heartbeat, neither vessel moved. Then sunlight caught something fluttering high upon the stranger's mast. Not a national naval ensign. Not the colors of a familiar merchant company. A plain dark flag. Captain Thornton lifted his telescope. His face hardened immediately. "What is it?" the first mate asked. The captain lowered the glass without taking his eyes off the stranger. "They've hidden their colors. No experienced sailor did that by accident." Merchant captains proudly displayed their nation's flag. Warships did the same. Only those wishing to conceal their identity approached another vessel without declaring who they were. Almost as soon as the first ship emerged, a second shadow materialized through the fog off the starboard quarter. Then, far behind, a third. The Providence had not been chased. She had been guided, carefully, patiently, into the middle of a tightening circle. Captain Thornton drew one slow breath before speaking the words every sailor aboard had feared since leaving England. "Beat to quarters." The drum began to sound across the deck. And for the first time on the voyage, every man aboard the asterisk Providence prepared not to fight the Atlantic, but the men who had mastered it. The steady beat of the drum rolled across the deck like a second heartbeat. It was not fast. It was not frantic. It was measured, deliberate. Every sailor aboard knew exactly what it meant. Work ended immediately. Buckets, coils of rope, sail needles, and carpenter's tools were laid aside where they stood. Men who had spent the last several weeks repairing sails and pumping bilges now moved toward stations they prayed they would never need. Captain Thornton walked the deck without raising his voice. "Close the hatches." The order echoed from one end of the ship to the other. Heavy wooden hatch covers slammed shut over the cargo hold. Iron bars dropped into place. If boarding became unavoidable, the valuable cargo beneath the deck would remain protected for as long as possible. The gunner uncovered the cannons. Canvas covers disappeared. The dark iron barrels glistened faintly with dew. Each weapon had already been loaded the previous day. Now only the final preparations remained. The slow matches were lit from carefully shielded lanterns. Thin trails of smoke curled into the cool morning air. The smell of burning cord drifted across the deck. It mixed with salt, tar, damp timber, and fear. The stranger off the port bow slowly emerged from the thinning fog. She was longer than the Providence asterisk. Her hull rode lower. More gunports lined her sides. Yet something immediately appeared unusual. She flew no identifying flag. Only a weathered dark banner that revealed nothing. The first mate narrowed his eyes. "She's been altered." You looked again. The vessel carried the shape of an ordinary merchant ship, but extra gun ports had been cut into her hull. The railings appeared reinforced. The deck held far more men than a merchant crew required. Miguel spoke quietly. "They disguise themselves. So they are pirates. Maybe privateers." Hans frowned. "Does it matter?" Miguel answered without hesitation. "Only after they capture you." The distinction mattered on paper. Privateers carried legal commissions from governments during wartime, authorizing them to seize enemy merchant vessels. Pirates answered to no nation. To a frightened merchant crew staring down loaded cannons, both looked remarkably similar. Captain Thornton continued watching through his telescope. Still no colors. The first mate nodded grimly. They're waiting. The captain understood immediately. They want us to show ours. Under maritime custom, a merchant ship identified itself first. Only then would the approaching vessel reveal its own flag. Sometimes. Not always. Captain Thornton refused. The English ensign remained furled. Minutes passed. The fog continued lifting. Now the second ship became fully visible. Smaller. Vaster. She carried raked masts designed for speed rather than cargo. The third remained farther astern, slowly closing the gap. They're boxing us in, Patrick muttered. Captain Thornton finally gave another order. Raise English colors. Several sailors hurried aloft. The Red Cross of St. George climbed slowly toward the masthead before catching the morning breeze. The crew waited. Nothing happened. The strange vessel maintained course. No answering flag appeared. Instead, she fired a cannon. Not directly at the Providence asterisk. The round shot skipped harmlessly across the water several hundred yards ahead before sinking beneath the waves. A warning. Not an attack. The meaning was unmistakable. Stop. Captain Thornton remained perfectly still. No one spoke. Finally, the first mate asked, "Your orders, sir." The captain looked toward the strengthening wind, then toward the open water beyond the strangers. They're faster. Everyone knew it. Merchant ships sacrificed speed for cargo. Purpose-built raiders sacrificed cargo for speed. Running offered little hope. "Surrender," someone whispered. Captain Thornton heard him. "No." The answer came immediately. "If they intend honest inspection, they can identify themselves." The first mate understood the captain's real concern. Once a merchant surrendered voluntarily, she became almost helpless. If the strangers proved to be pirates rather than lawful privateers, resistance afterward became nearly impossible. Another cannon boomed. This shot landed closer. Water erupted only 50 yards from the bow. The captain finally moved. "Signal them." A white cloth rose briefly from the yardarm. "Not surrender. A request for identification." The stranger answered. "Silence. No flag. No signal. Only continued approach." Patrick sighed. "That tells us everything." The gunner quietly took position behind the forward cannon. Thomas swallowed nervously while checking his musket for perhaps the 5th time. Even Edward, still walking with difficulty, insisted upon carrying powder between the guns. "No one sits this out," he said. The surgeon objected. Edward ignored him. "If the hip falls..." He rested a hand against the rail. "We all fall." Captain Thornton gathered the crew amidships. He removed his hat. His expression remained calm. I'll not ask any man to die for cargo." Several sailors exchanged glances. "But I'll ask every man to defend his ship." He looked slowly around the deck. "If these vessels identify themselves properly." He nodded toward the approaching stranger. "There'll be no blood." "And if they don't?" Patrick asked quietly. The captain replaced his hat. "Then we make them earn every plank." No cheers followed. No dramatic speeches. Only determined faces. Real sailors understood that courage rarely sounded heroic. It usually sounded practical. The distance continued shrinking. Through the telescope, you could finally distinguish individual figures aboard the leading vessel. Some carried muskets. Others coiled grappling hooks attached to heavy ropes. One man stood near the helm wearing a broad-brimmed hat trimmed with faded feathers. He watched the asterisk Providence through his own telescope. Watching the captain, studying, calculating. The wind freshened slightly. Captain Thornton seized the opportunity immediately. "Brace the yards." The crew sprang into motion. Sails shifted. The Providence leaned harder as she altered course toward a stronger breeze. For a brief, exhilarating moment, the merchant brig surged ahead with surprising speed. Hope flickered. Perhaps enough wind. Perhaps enough distance. Perhaps. The second strange vessel answered first. Her sails adjusted with astonishing precision. Within minutes, she matched the maneuver perfectly. The third ship followed. They had anticipated the attempt. Hans lowered his spyglass. "They've done this before." "Many times," Miguel replied. The first cannonball aimed directly at the Providence arrived shortly afterward. It screamed overhead with a terrifying sound, unlike anything you had imagined. The shot passed above the mainmast by only a few feet before vanishing into the sea behind. Nobody moved. Captain Thornton did not even glance upward. "They're ranging." You frowned. "What does that mean?" Patrick answered. "They're measuring. The next shot will be closer." He proved correct. The second round struck the water beside the hull. A towering column of spray drenched everyone standing near the rail. The splinters of shattered seawater, not wood, stung your face. The third shot never came. Instead, a flag climbed slowly toward the masthead of the leading vessel. Black. Not entirely black. As the cloth caught the wind, details emerged. A white skull. Crossed bones beneath it. The image lasted only a heartbeat. Then another flag rose beneath it. Red. Plain crimson. Miguel's face lost all color. You looked at him. "What does the red one mean?" His answer came almost as a whisper. "The black flag offers surrender." He swallowed hard. "The red one means..." No one hurried him. And no mercy. Silence settled across the Providence asterisk. Even the waves seemed quieter. Captain Thornton continued staring through the telescope. Then he lowered it slowly. "So, His voice remained remarkably steady. "They've made their choice." He turned toward the gunner. "Run out the starboard battery." Heavy cannons rolled forward until their muzzles protruded through the open gun ports. Slow matches glowed brighter. Powder monkeys, boys scarcely older than 15, waited beside ammunition boxes. Every man found his station. The pirate ship continued closing. Closer. Closer still. Soon individual faces became visible across the water. Hard ice. Weathered coats. Cutlasses hanging at their belts. One raised a speaking trumpet. His voice carried clearly across the narrowing gap. "Strike your colors." Captain Thornton stepped onto the quarterdeck rail so every man aboard both ships could see him. He cupped his hands around his mouth. The reply carried proudly over the Atlantic. "This ship sails under the crown of England." A pause. "Then, you'll have to come and take her." For one suspended moment, neither vessel moved. Then the pirate captain lowered his arm. The first broadside erupted in a wall of flame. The sound of the cannon fire swallowed everything. For a moment, there was no ocean, no sky, no ship, only thunder. The entire asterisk Providence shook beneath the force of her own guns as smoke exploded from the starboard battery. The deck trembled beneath your boots. The air filled instantly with the bitter smell of sulfur and burned powder. The first broadside was not aimed to sink the pirate vessel. It was a warning, a statement. The Providence would not surrender without a fight. Through the thick cloud of smoke, you saw the pirate ship disappear. Not because it had sunk, because both vessels were temporarily hidden inside the same gray curtain. Men shouted. Orders crossed the deck. The gun crews worked with frightening speed. Fire. Reload. Ram. Aim. Fire again. The process repeated. Every movement mattered. Every second mattered. A cannon that fired too slowly could leave the ship helpless. A cannon loaded incorrectly could kill the men standing beside it. The gunner moved between the weapons like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. Stand clear. The next cannon erupted. The recoil slammed the wooden carriage backward. The crew dragged it forward again using ropes and pure muscle. You had seen cannons before. You had never understood their violence. A cannon was not simply a weapon. It was a machine designed to transform stored energy into chaos. And now that chaos surrounded you. The pirate ship answered. Their broadside came seconds later. The sound was deeper, heavier. They carried more guns. The first shot struck the sea. The second tore through the upper rigging. The explosion above you sounded like a tree splitting during a storm. A section of rope snapped loose and whipped across the deck. A sailor beside you fell instantly. For one terrible moment, you thought he had been struck by a cannonball. Then he moved. The rope had cut across his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt. The surgeon's assistants dragged him away. There was no time to ask whether he would recover. The battle continued. Captain Thornton stood exposed on the quarterdeck. Not because he was fearless, but because everyone needed to see him. A frightened crew became a defeated crew. A disciplined crew could survive almost anything. Hold your fire. The captain waited. The pirate vessel continued approaching. Closer. Closer. Only when both ships reached effective range did he give the order. Fire. The Providence answered with another violent roar. This time the shot found its mark. You heard a terrible crash across the water. Through gaps in the smoke, you saw broken wood flying from the pirate ship's side. A cheer almost erupted. Captain Thornton stopped it immediately. Reload. A hit did not mean victory. The battle had only begun. The pirate ship changed tactics. Instead of continuing a straight approach, she turned sharply, attempting to cross the Providence's bow. The maneuver was dangerous. If successful, she could rake the merchant ship with devastating fire from end to end. The first mate shouted, "They're trying to cross us." Captain Thornton reacted instantly. Hard to port. The helmsman fought the wheel. The ship answered slowly. Too slowly. Merchant vessels were not built for sudden movements. Every second felt painfully long. The pirate ship gained position. You saw men preparing ropes, grappling hooks, boarding weapons. They were coming, not to sink the Providence to take her. The realization changed everything. A sinking ship offered a terrible ending. A captured ship offered something worse. The stories sailors told in taverns returned to your mind. Men beaten, cargo stolen, crews abandoned far from home. Some pirates killed prisoners simply to avoid witnesses. Others forced captured sailors into service. Nobody knew what fate waited. The unknown frightened you more than the cannons. Boarding stations. The cry echoed. Every sailor moved. Muskets were distributed. Pikes lifted. Axes tightened in hands. The deck transformed. The men who normally repaired sails and cleaned cargo became soldiers. Not trained soldiers. Not professional fighters. But men with no alternative. Patrick stood beside you holding a boarding axe. You stay behind me. You shook your head. I can fight. I know. He looked at you seriously. That's why you stay behind me. There was no insult in his words. Only experience. Young sailors often confused courage with rushing forward. Old sailors understood survival required patience. The pirate ship came closer. You could hear voices now. Commands. Laughter. Shouting. They sounded disturbingly confident. Perhaps because they had done this many times. Perhaps because they had seen countless merchant crews surrender before the first boarding hook was thrown. The pirate captain appeared again near his bow. He raised his speaking trumpet. Last chance. Captain Thornton stepped forward. No answer came immediately. The captain looked across his own deck, at the sailors, the wounded, the terrified, the determined. Then he looked back. No. The single word carried across the water. The pirate captain lowered the trumpet. The grappling hooks flew. Several missed. Some struck the rail. One buried itself into the forward rigging. Immediately, pirate sailors began pulling themselves across. The first man to reach the Providence was larger than you expected. Not a legendary monster. Not some terrifying creature. Just a man. A man wearing a weathered coat, carrying a curved blade, and believing this ship belonged to him. A sailor beside the rail fire. The pirate fell backward. The battle became chaos. There was no elegant formation. No organized lines. Only desperate men fighting across a narrow wooden deck above a hungry ocean. The sound changed completely. Cannons became distant. Now came the clash of steel, the crack of muskets, the screams of injured men, the smell of smoke mixed with blood. You had imagined battle before. You had imagined bravery. You had never imagined how confusing it would be. A man shouted beside you. You turned. Someone collided with your shoulder. A pistol fired. The deck became slippery. Every direction held danger. Patrick moved like someone who had lived this nightmare before. He blocked a blade, struck downward, moved aside, never wasting motion. The pirate fighting him was younger, stronger perhaps, but inexperienced. Experience won. The pirate stumbled. Patrick's axe stopped inches from his face. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then Patrick shoved him backward. Drop it. The pirate hesitated. Patrick's eyes hardened. Don't make me choose. The man lowered his weapon. A strange mercy. In the middle of violence, you noticed something then. Not every sailor on either side wanted to die. Many were simply obeying orders. The battle spread toward the center deck. The pirate boarding party had gained ground, but they had not broken the crews. That surprised them. You could see it. They expected fear. They found resistance. Captain Thornton personally joined the defense near the mainmast. A pistol in one hand, a sword in the other. The sight shocked everyone. Captains usually commanded from safety. Thornton fought beside his men, pushed them back. The order came. The crew responded. Slowly, desperately, the pirates began losing their advantage. Then a new sound came from the enemy vessel. A drum, not the signal to board. A warning. The pirate captain had realized something. The Providence was not surrendering. And the longer the fight continued, the more damage both ships would suffer. The pirate crew began withdrawing. Hooks were cut. Ropes severed. Men jumped back across the narrowing gap. The final pirate hesitated near the rail. He looked toward the ship he was leaving behind. then disappeared into the smoke. The Providence fired one final cannon. The shot struck the pirate vessel's stern. Wood exploded. The enemy ship disappeared behind a cloud of smoke. When the air finally cleared, they were retreating. Not defeated completely. Not destroyed. But leaving. For several seconds, nobody aboard the asterisk Providence moved. The silence afterward felt impossible. The Atlantic continued rolling beneath the hull as though nothing had happened. As though two ships had not just turned the sea into a battlefield. Then someone shouted, "We're alive." The words broke the spell. Men collapsed where they stood. Some laughed. Some cried. Some simply stared. Victory felt strangely quiet. Captain Thornton immediately began counting. Not celebrating. Counting. The living. The wounded. The damage. Because surviving the battle was only the first challenge. Now came the question every sailor feared after a fight at sea. Could the ship survive the damage? The answer waited below deck, where water was already beginning to enter through the shattered hull. The celebration lasted less than a minute. That was all Captain Thornton allowed. A sailor might survive a cannon battle and still drown before sunset. The Atlantic did not care who had won. The ocean only cared whether the ship remained afloat. Damage report. The captain's voice cut through the noise. The crew immediately returned to work. The wounded were carried below. The dead were covered quietly. The broken rigging was secured. The cannons were made safe. The Providence had survived the attack, but she no longer looked like the proud merchant vessel that had departed Bristol. Her sails hung unevenly. Several ropes dangled uselessly from the damaged rigging. The deck was covered with fragments of wood, torn canvas, and scattered equipment. The smell of smoke remained everywhere. A sailor who had spent weeks caring for a ship could almost feel its injuries. The first mate returned from below deck with a grim expression. 3 feet of water in the forward compartment. The captain's face remained controlled. How bad? Not flooding rapidly. A pause. But the hull is damaged. Everyone understood what that meant. A ship could survive a battle. A ship could survive a storm. But a wounded hull in the middle of the Atlantic was another enemy entirely. Captain Thornton immediately sent the carpenter below. You followed with permission to assist. The lower deck looked like a different world. Dark, cramped, filled with the smell of wet wood. Water rushed through a damaged section near the bow. Not a powerful stream. Not yet. But every sigh. Lore knew small problems became deadly if ignored. The carpenter pressed his hand against the broken planks. Shot entered here. He examined the damage carefully. The cannonball had not passed completely through. It had smashed several outer planks and cracked the inner structure. A few inches deeper, and the ship might have been lost. Can you repair it? The carpenter did not answer immediately. That worried you more than anything. Finally, he nodded. Temporary. The word mattered. Temporary meant survival, not safety. The crew immediately formed a chain. Buckets, pumps, fuels. Every man took a position. The same sailors who had fought minutes earlier now fought a different battle. Not against pirates, against water. The ship's pumps began their endless rhythm. Up, down, up, down. The sound became almost hypnotic. Hours passed. The carpenter worked by lantern light, cutting replacement timber from emergency supplies. The ocean continued moving beneath them. The ship continued leaning slightly. Every person aboard knew that if the repairs failed, there would be no second chance. Above deck, the captain questioned the captured pirate prisoners. Several had been left behind during the retreat. Wounded, exhausted, unable to return to their vessel. You expected anger, punishment, revenge. Instead, Captain Thornton spoke calmly. Who commands your ship? The oldest prisoner remained silent. The captain repeated the question. Still nothing. Finally, Patrick, standing nearby, said quietly, "He's deciding whether we kill him or not." The prisoner's eyes narrowed. Captain Thornton looked at Patrick. "No." Then he looked back. "We are not pirates." The words carried weight. Even enemies noticed the difference. The prisoner eventually answered. Captain Elias Vane. The name meant something to several older sailors. Not famous, but known. A privateer turned raider. A man who had learned that the difference between legal warfare and piracy often depended on who wrote the paperwork. How many guns? 20. A murmur moved through the crew. 20 guns. The Providence carried only a fraction of that. And why attack us? The prisoner gave a tired smile. Because you looked alone. That answer was simple. Terrifyingly simple. At sea, weakness invited attention. A damaged sail. A slow speed. A careless signal. Any one of these could mark a ship as a target. The prisoner continued. You fought harder than expected. Captain Thornton said nothing. The prisoner looked toward the deck above. Most merchants surrender. Why didn't you? The captain's answer was quiet. Because this crew deserved better. The prisoner studied him for several seconds, then looked away. Even enemies could recognize leadership. By evening, the temporary repairs held. The water level stopped rising. A wave of relief passed through the ship. Not joy. Not yet. Just relief. The dead were buried at sea before sunset. 3 sailors. Names recorded carefully in the ship's log. 3 men who had eaten breakfast that morning. 3 men who had worked beside their companions only hours earlier. Now wrapped in canvas beneath the Atlantic. The ceremony was quiet. No grand speeches. No dramatic prayers. Only respect. The captain read their names. The chaplain aboard spoke a short blessing. Then the sea received them. The weighted bodies disappeared beneath the waves. Nobody watched the water afterward. Every sailor knew the Atlantic kept what it took. Night arrived. For the first time since the battle, the crew had a chance to rest. But sleep did not come easily. Every sound caused attention. Every shadow looked like another ship. The battle had changed everyone. Before, danger had been something distant. Storms, illness, the unknown. Now danger had faces, voices, weapons. You understood something important. The Atlantic was not empty. It was crowded with ambitions. Merchants chasing wealth, sailors seeking wages, navies defending nations, pirates seeking fortune. Every ship carried people with different reasons for crossing the same water. The next morning brought another challenge. The wind shifted, not violently, but enough to complicate repairs. Captain Thornton ordered the damaged sails adjusted. The ship could no longer maintain her previous speed. Every sailor knew what that meant. More days at sea. More food consumed. More chances for trouble. The navigator studied the chart. We're still on course, but slower. The captain nodded. Slow is better than sunk. A practical answer. The kind sailors trusted. Over the next several days, the crew worked constantly. The battle wounds slowly disappeared. Broken ropes were replaced. Damaged wood was reinforced. The torn sail was patched. The Providence became less like a wounded animal and more like herself again. But one thing had changed permanently. The crew no longer felt like strangers. They had fought together. They had bled together. They had watched each other risk everything. A ship could create friendships quickly. Survival created them even faster. Thomas, once the youngest and most frightened among them, now carried himself differently. You noticed it. You changed. He smiled. Did I? Before the battle. He nodded. I know. What happened? He looked across the deck. I realized everyone was afraid. The answer surprised you. You weren't. I was. He looked at his hands. But before, I thought experienced sailors weren't scared. And now I know they are. He looked toward Patrick and Miguel repairing rope nearby. They just work anyway. That was perhaps the greatest lesson the Atlantic taught. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was continuing while fear remained. A week after the attack, the lookout shouted something nobody expected. Land birds. The words instantly changed the entire ship. Every sailor rushed to look. High above the mast, several birds circled. Not ocean wanderers. Land birds. Small. Exhausted. But unmistakable. The crew stared upward as though they had seen a miracle. Miguel laughed softly. Close now. The navigator checked the chart. Very close. After weeks of endless horizon, the idea of land felt almost impossible. Some sailors had forgotten the feeling. The smell of soil. The sound of waves against a harbor wall. The sight of buildings. Families. Crowded streets. The Providence continued westward beneath a fading sunset. Behind her lay storms, sickness, hunger, fear, and battle. Ahead waited the coast. But the journey was not finished. Because reaching land after crossing the Atlantic did not mean the sailors' suffering ended. Often, it simply changed form.